6 a.m. here on Monday morning. Brenden Slaughter with you here on Rip City Mornings. Team USA men's basketball are gold medal winners in Paris, taking down France to win their fifth straight gold medal. On the women's side, Team USA also took home gold, also against France, but that was their eighth gold medal in a row. And in NFL action, the Seattle Seahawks opened preseason with a 16-3 win over the Los Angeles Chargers. Coming up, we're going to have 33rd team writer Dan Pizzuta on to talk some NFL, Spotrack's Keith Smith to talk some NBA, and KEGO's TJ Mathewson to talk a little Oregon State scrimmage over the weekend. It's Rip City Mornings here on a Monday with Brenden Slaughter. Welcoming you into Rip City Mornings here on a Monday. No, it's not Justin Meyers. It's Brenden Slaughter sitting in with you guys. Justin will be back tomorrow, but happy to be with you guys. Also joined by super producer Michael Shacker on the other side of the glass. Happy to be spending my Monday morning with you guys. Got a lot to get into on the big show today. A whole bunch of stuff. We've got an awesome rundown of guests today. We're going to be talking some NFL with Dan Pizzuta coming up in just about 15 minutes. We've also got Keith Smith coming on. We're going to talk some Olympics, talk some NBA. Now, NFL's kicked off. NBA is going to be right around the corner. And then, of course, we're going to talk some Oregon State Beavers. KJO's TJ Mathewson is going to join us later in the show. And we're going to talk everything we saw at Oregon State's first scrimmage. So it's going to be a big show today. A lot of things to get into. But, just want to start it off by talking to everyone about the adventure that I had this weekend that was my refrigerator. So I'll go ahead and loop you into this on this one, Shacker, just because it was pretty much my entire Sunday yesterday. So last couple days.
Refrigerator Perry?
Sorry?
What do you mean, your refrigerator or the fridge from the Chicago Bears?
Oh, no, the refrigerator in my house.
Okay.
And I had to legit go full handyman repair on this yesterday. So for the last two weeks or so, we have been wondering why our fridge has been a little warmer than we thought, just not quite at temperature. And we've noticed that, our milk would spoil faster or some of our, more dairy-based items would spoil. Behind the curtain, we have a Samsung fridge. Didn't buy it. I'm not sure I would, but inherited it. But long story short, found out yesterday that, it was pushing 60 degrees. So after a painstaking process of going through, watching YouTube videos, trying to figure out what was wrong with this fridge and why it wasn't cooling down, I find out that I have to take out every shelf in the fridge, which requires undoing screws, not just taking shelves in and out easy ways. No, it's screwed in, have to do all that. And by the time you take out all the shelves, you have to take apart this flat panel on the back that reveals the cooling coils. As it turned out, there had been so much ice buildup behind that cooling panel and around the cooling element and all that, that the panel was frozen to the fridge. And the ice was starting to get, just everywhere, blocking the vents, everything. So everything is out of our fridge, Shacker. I climb into the fridge, rear end in the bottom of the fridge and sitting there trying to, wedge this piece off the wall and realize that it's still completely frozen. So after letting it defrost for a minute, getting a hairdryer from upstairs, we're able to take the back of this fridge off, and it's had to be slightly broken to get it off because there was a piece that was so frozen it was going to take years to come off. So we finally get this piece off, and we see the cooling element that is just warped in ice, probably 3-4 inches thick. The drains are clogged, just everything that would not work and make a refrigerator work is messed up. So then I proceed to sit there in the fridge for, 30, 45 minutes, with a hair dryer, blowing off this cooling element, just watching the shards of ice come off, and all the while, Shacker, all this water is just running straight down. At this point, I'm sitting in a puddle of fridge ice juice, and at this point, I've got family members that are like, "Well, do you want a towel? Do you want to change?" And I'm like, "No, I'm already too deep at this point. We've got to get this thing, fixed and whatnot." So by the time we finally are blow out this element and get all the ice off of it and clear off the area that looked like it had been frozen for probably 15, 20 years, even though the fridge is not that old, and we get through and clear it out, and we're like, okay, now the fridge is really hot because we had been running a hair dryer in it. Finally got everything melted, put the piece back on, and at that point it's pushing 70 degrees in the fridge. So we're hoping and praying that things will go well and nothing will ultimately come back to bite us. Leave it alone, come back a few hours later running like a champ. So that was my Sunday yesterday. Was definitely, before prepping for this show, of course, was fully taking apart a fridge, learning more about the cooling element and all that process that I thought I ever would have.
How's the food?
It's good. Yeah,
So,
everything's cold now. But most importantly, I was almost a mini hero in my house, Shacker, because we woke up, we're like, all right, let's go to Home Depot and buy a new fridge. So I don't know, minimum $1,000, probably 1,500. So fridges are not cheap, and I'd be curious to know if anyone else has had issues with Samsung fridges. Again, you can join the conversation 503-248-0620 this morning, because this is the same fridge where Ice Maker just kicked the bucket probably 6 years ago, and it just was not worth getting fixed. You had to either get a new fridge or not get it. So,
so what, did you switch to ice trays?
oh yeah, I got
Yeah, same here.
the cubes out there, but it was one of those things where we inherited a Samsung fridge, Shacker. Not sure I'd ever buy a Samsung fridge. I think they need to stick to making phones.
I've seen Gordon Ramsay get violent when there was a restaurant that he was featuring that had a broken fridge, and
Yeah,
all
I
all
mean,
the restaurant's food was at 60, 70 degrees.
right, and just casually. I mean, everyone in my house, works during the day, and there'll be times in the morning where we, leave food out in the fridge to, defrost overnight, and that was my first thought when we kind of had that like aha moment of like, we bought this, carton of milk like 4 days ago. How is it already bad? And we're like, okay, chalked it up as having bad milk, or, maybe that was a bad batch. But then we're like, okay, this is getting to be a little common. And, to your point, Shacker, that was my first concern, is like, what did we eat that maybe wasn't totally food safe? I mean, obviously I'm here with you guys, so, nothing too bad, but I know that like milk-based products, you don't want them to get over, like you said, 40 some degrees, can cause, some stomach problems and, other little things like that. So, long story short, we had to get rid of most of that kind of stuff, like some salad dressings also, kick the bucket, so to speak. But yeah, it was like the greatest feeling ever to have a be able to like, it was one of those true, like, you put so much time and effort into this. My fingers still hurt from trying to push on all the little things to pull the fridges or pull the shelves out of the fridge. And you just afterwards feel absolutely accomplished. So that was a big part of my Sunday, was cleaning the fridge. And again, like I said, the I'm sure I'm not the only one who's had issues with the Samsung fridge. I've certainly known a few, but that was definitely how the morning got started yesterday. And then by about 2 o'clock when we got it done, I'm like, all right, time to completely focus on this show. But nevertheless, that was a fun slash learning slash very frustrating experience at my house yesterday. A couple other things we want to tease here before we get into talking some NFL with Dan Pizzuta. Definitely want to talk a little bit about the closing ceremonies last night at Paris. Obviously, the Olympics, couple weeks now, and now we turn the page and start to head towards Los Angeles in 2028. And I didn't catch as much of the Olympics as I would have liked to this year. Kind of just watched some specific things that I was looking for, but to have a closing ceremony like that, where you have Tom Cruise jumping off the roof of the building and landing down, then taking the Olympic flag and quote returning it to L.A. This is something I'm super excited for. And we'll obviously be talking about it a little bit more today, and obviously throughout leading up. But me being 28, I didn't have much recollection for the 2002 Olympics, Winter Olympics that was in Salt Lake, and obviously really wasn't for the 1996 ones in Atlanta. So I'm very excited just for the first time in my lifetime to see, Olympics and be able to kind of understand all of it when it's here, because I think the way that they kind of took the baton and kind of hyped up what the future is going to be with LA. I thought that was really cool. And, it wasn't just Tom Cruise. You had Billie Eilish out there too, Red Hot Chili Peppers, all these things that were kind of just trying to say, hey, Paris was cool, but now it's our turn. And, y'all have heard Justin and I for a while. We've complained about start times and all that. And now, we get what we want as Americans, being able to have, the exact times in LA, everything be in prime time, not have it be like Tokyo, where it was a day ahead, or Paris, where it's early in the morning, it's late in the night. Say what you will, but I really do like the aspect of having the Olympics, on American times, because I think that's definitely when you're getting a lot of the viewpoints. And I think that was a lot of it too for me this year, was not being able to know exact times. Catching stuff on Peacock and all that was just kind of, oh, if the Olympics was on, I caught it outside of the basketballs. I'll admit I didn't get a chance to watch golf with Scotty Scheffler, but things like that. I'm curious to see what it's going to be like when it's at, our usual typical times here in America, and see how that goes. But nevertheless, some more things to talk about there. We're obviously going to get into more of the Olympics, talk a little bit of the Olympics with Keith Smith in hour number 2. But yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of things that are curious about Los Angeles in 2028. Obviously, there's going to be some new sports that are making their debut. Flag football is one of those things that the NFL has been pushing for a while. That's going to award their first Olympic medals down in Los Angeles. Baseball and softball, neither were played in Paris, will also be back. So I think that's going to be, something very interesting, just kind of to see the sports continue to grow. And obviously, the hype is going to be real. I mean, to think that we haven't had, an Olympics in Summer Olympics since obviously 96, and then before that, LA. I think it's going to be huge. I think it's going to be one of those things where you see a lot of different people converge on Los Angeles. I think it's going to be nearly impossible to get a plane ticket around that time. And more than anything, it's just going to be really cool to see these athletes, like Noah Lyles, and, maybe even we see Kevin Durant come back. Maybe it's a new class of guys, but just seeing more and more guys who are here, in Los Angeles representing America. I think they're going to do a really big deal with it, and I think it's going to be one of those things that goes all out. So we'll go ahead and take a quick break here, but when we come back, we're going to be catching up with Dan Pizzuta from the 33rd team. A lot of things happened over the weekend as far as NFL goes. We had week 1 of preseason. There's a ton of things that I want to get in with Dan about. Most importantly, we're talking some Seahawks as they take down Justin Herbert, or not so much Justin Herbert, I should say, and the Justin Herbert-less Los Angeles Chargers in preseason. But nevertheless, first one of the Mike McDonald era, so that was cool to see as well. And then a lot from the rookie quarterbacks going to be talking as well. Lots of like from Caleb Williams. I really liked what I saw from Bo Nix. J.J. McCarthy looked good. So is it week 1 preseason overreactions? Potentially. But nevertheless, I saw some quarterback and some play that I was really excited to get into. Dan Pizzuta up next from the 33rd team here on Rip City Mornings. Welcoming you back into Rip City Mornings here on a Monday. Brenden Slaughter with you, sitting in for Justin Meyers. Got an exciting show on hand today, but going to catch up with Dan Pizzuta from the 33rd team to talk some NFL football. Dan, what's going on, my man? How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing well. Obviously week one of preseason is in the books, Dan, so it's always nice to now have some overreactions to talk about here on a Monday, as there was quite a bit. But let's go ahead and before we get into the games and talk a little bit about just some of the big topics that I'm curious to get your thoughts on. Let's go ahead and start with Brenden Ayuk. What's the latest in that saga as we currently stand? Do you think the Steelers or Browns or maybe a third team makes a move, or is it more likely he goes back to San Francisco at this point?
Yeah, I was kind of always just in the camp that I was going to believe Brenden Ayuk was traded when he suited up for another team, like in a game, because it doesn't make a lot of sense for San Francisco to trade him. Just in kind of the impact he has in that offense, he's kind of the one. I don't mean to use real wide receiver in a derogatory way toward everyone else on that offense, but, he plays the more traditional wide receiver role that allows everything else to kind of open up down the field. Just kind of going back and really watching his impact on that offense, it would be very hard to replace him. So with San Francisco having that fifth-year option, they have a potential franchise tag. They are a team that, there is not a lot of urgency in the terms of how quickly they actually, need to get a deal done. Because they could have him under contract for another 2 years. So I still believe there is something that's going to be worked out in San Francisco because it just makes way too much sense for both sides here. And I think you kind of saw Ayuk is very picky in where he goes. You heard the report that New England offered, top 5 receiver money, like $32 million a year, and he turned that down. So I think if there is, that small select places where Ayuk would go. And then on top of that, you have San Francisco, who doesn't really have really incentive to trade him right now. I feel like something does eventually get done, and we'll see Ayuk stay in San Francisco.
We're talking with Dan Pizzuta from the 33rd team. One thing you mentioned there, Dan, that was kind of interesting. You said that ultimately, he will probably, work something out with San Francisco. I'm curious, as far as his value, like I love Brenden Ayuk. I think he's a really good player, and I think it's underrated that, he's worked with, Jimmy Garoppolo, Brock Purdy, some semblance of Trey Lance. He hasn't had a true superstar and still put up pretty good statistics. Do you think he's worth what the San Francisco 49ers are asking? Like, 2 first-round picks seems like an awful lot for a guy with just a couple 1,000-yard seasons, as much as I do like him. What are your thoughts there, Dan?
Yeah, so that's, I think, is what makes this tough and is probably why, a trade hadn't been worked out to the sense because the 49ers do know Brenden Ayuk is very good. And he's probably, you can say maybe top 5. He's probably a top 10 wide receiver. He is very good. If you watch him play in, play out, the things he opens up for that San Francisco offense, just the way he's able to separate, the way he gets open, it is a very valuable skill. I think we would see Ayuk if he was in a more, traditional pass-heavy offense, would kind of be putting up some of the numbers that we've seen from some of these other big wide receivers. So San Francisco knows that. I think it is very hard for them to get the type of value they would want back. And I think we kind of saw in some of the other trade reporting and how they were kind of asking for a receiver back. And with the talks with Cleveland, they were potentially going to get Amari Cooper back. It's, they know they would have to replace that some way. So it is going to be a lot to give up. It is. I think it's tough right now in the modern NFL to give up 2 first-round picks for anyone who isn't a quarterback. But I think that's just because of how valuable we know those first-round picks it can be. So, I think he's going to be worth whatever contract he gets. I think the tough part is San Francisco would have to get back something of equal value, and I think that's been very hard for them to accept of what that trade package would be.
Totally, absolutely. Some good points there. Curious your thoughts on shifting on over to the Dallas Cowboys. Why do you think there hasn't been the extensions from Jerry Jones yet, Dan? A couple weeks ago, it was kind of like, it was kind of a fun thing, like, oh, Jerry Jones is in court for his paternity suit. This is why they're not getting extensions done. And then, as the week's gone on, you've seen Dak say things like money's out there. And it seems like Micah Parsons is probably third on that list of priority. And CeeDee Lamb obviously being number 1, that continues with, a very interesting interaction with Jerry Jones on the radio yesterday and all that. So I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are on CeeDee Lamb. Is he somebody that Dallas is going to pay? Because he's coming off an incredible year, and I'm just kind of surprised they're balking at giving him Justin Jefferson type money with what he did this last year.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you why they haven't done it yet because it doesn't make sense. It's really baffled me kind of all off season. So kind of in the same sense of Ayuk, when Jerry Jones says he doesn't have urgency, technically, he is correct, right? Because CeeDee Lamb he's playing on his 5th-year option this year. They could franchise him after this year, so they could still have him under contract for 2 years before they really necessarily need to get an extension done. The problem with Dallas and what's kind of different from San Francisco already has pretty much everyone paid. So they can move some money around to make some of these future extensions like a Brenden Ayuk or a Brock Purdy work. The problem with Dallas is they have their 3 big guys coming up right now. Dak is going to be a free agent at the end of the year. He has a no tag clause, so he is going to be a free agent. And the way contracts work in the NFL is the earlier you get them done, the more you can spread out the money over the existing years of the contract so you can lower some cap hits early in the season. The problem with Dallas right now is everyone's going to be coming up at the same time. You don't have that flexibility now when you're going to be putting new contracts on these books. So if you are waiting till the last minute to get CeeDee Lamb done, you're waiting till the last minute to get Dak done, if you're now going to wait till the last minute to get Micah Parsons done, that's going to be really hard to kind of just manage on the cap. And the earlier they get these done, the easier it would have been on themselves. I thought that, in February when they could have started talking to these players. So I have no idea why Dallas is going to wait so long to do this. And it really is going to be hurtful in the short term because it seems like it's kind of making everybody involved a little mad. And I think it's also going to hurt them in the long term because they can't work these contracts out on the cap as easy as, say, like a Philadelphia in the same division, a team that gets everyone done kind of as early as possible. They spread those cap hits out, and really they can have so many players on these big contracts, and it's not really, hurting their cap. And I think that's been a very smart team building sense that they've done there. And Dallas is just they're really hurting themselves by waiting long on everyone so far.
Yeah, you used the perfect word, just, baffling and fascinating because, I look at all the things you just said, Dan, and then, one of my favorite sports movies is Moneyball. And when Art Howe, Philip Seymour Hoffman comes to, Billy Beane and he wants to talk about his contract. And he's like, a 1-year contract means the same thing to a coach as it does to a player. There's not a lot of faith there. And then you think back that Mike McCarthy is in this lame duck year where it has just, does it feel as awkward as it feels like to me, Dan, or am I kind of reading into it so much? Like, it just feels like the extensions, the 1 year for McCarthy, the fact that, it's almost like they're going all in on this single year, but not even, a lot of confidence in it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's all in a sense that the entire future of the Cowboys kind of depends on the results of 2024. It's not all in a sense where they've put all their resources into 2024 and they're trying to win right now, because that's not the case. If they were going to do that, they would have gotten probably 3 of these guys signed, kind of lowered the cap hits, been able to bring in some other free agents. They were just straight up inactive during free agency. So if they didn't think they were good enough last year, they haven't really added anything to make this team better this year outside of guys they brought in the draft. So how the future of the Cowboys is going to be kind of really does it revolves around what 2024 looks like, because there are all of those contracts that are coming up. If Dak doesn't want to sign an extension and things go real south or weird in the season, he can just leave, and Dallas has no say in that because of that no tag clause. Again, like you said, McCarthy is on the last year of his deal. Who knows if they're, comfortable. And Jerry Jones has been very comfortable keeping slightly underperforming head coaches for quite a while. He's not, aggressive in that sense. But, there's a lot of question marks that really are up in the air and that probably we won't really know how they turn out until this season is over. And that could be real awkward for what goes on in Dallas.
Yeah, Dallas is one of those teams I'm just fascinated to watch this year because there's so much going on. I feel like something's definitely going to happen. Gonna go ahead and switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the action this weekend, Dan. Not a lot seems to go wrong or has gone wrong for the Kansas City Chiefs recently. But one of the more interesting safeties I've ever seen just is that still just working out the kinks with this new NFL kickoff rule? Because I watched that clip probably 3-4 times and still trying to figure out how exactly that happened.
Yeah, it seems it's just a loophole in the current rules, the way they were written. So I believe in the XFL for the original kickoff that once a ball actually hit the ground in the end zone, it was a touchback. But I believe the NFL wants to try to encourage some more returns, and because of that, it does make it a little different. Because once the ball hits the end zone and if it does bounce out, it is still in play. So I'm not sure if that's something that's going to get relooked at or not. But yeah, that is certainly there might be some kinks in this new kickoff rule that they have to kind of figure out as they go.
I'm curious, kind of what are your thoughts on that new kickoff rule, Dan? You know, I obviously got a chance to check it out a little bit this weekend, and then I think I'm still kind of in the middle on it, but then I went down to, watch some college, scrimmages this weekend. I'm like, oh, that's the real kickoff that I'm used to. So where do you kind of stand on that kickoff, and ultimately how successful do you think it'll be?
So in theory, I like it a lot. I like the design of it. I think there could be a lot of creativity in it. My hesitation with it is I think the NFL might have hedged a little too much by putting the touchback line at the 30 instead of the 35 like it was in the XFL. Because right now I think we've seen, this is just through 1 week of preseason games, but teams haven't been great at returning yet. I think they're averaging about like 25 yards per kickoff, but they're starting at about the 28, 29 yard line still. So that's almost a kickoff. And then we have seen a couple of those big runs break off. So if teams aren't doing great at returns right now, and they're already nearly at the touchback line, I don't know how much incentive there is going to be for teams to really play the variance game here when they are kicking off. So I kind of expect there to be some more touchbacks on purpose as we get further into the season, because I think teams are only going to get better at returning. So I think there might have to be some recalculations of where that touchback line is going to be, because I think it's going to kind of end up being part of the same thing where teams who are kicking off really don't want to risk a long return once teams get better. So they're just going to, take the ball at the 30 and kind of hope that, they take away the chances of any big return there.
We're joined by Dan Pizzuta from the 33rd team here on Rip City Mornings. Just a couple more things for you, Dan. Curious too, let's talk some quarterbacks. Talk a little bit about Joe Burrow. He's one of the more fascinating players in the league because, over the last few years, he's kind of been the only player that's proven that Patrick Mahomes can be beat in the AFC Championship, right? And I think that, just the dominance that we've seen from Mahomes and the Chiefs the last couple of years, they were one of the teams that were able to actually get past them and get over it. He obviously coming off an injury. What are your thoughts on him going into this year? Do you think Cincinnati can get back and kind of be a leader in that division, or do you think they're going to kind of have to make up some lost ground from last year?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of both, right? I think we saw there were some good things with Burrow when he, got back on the field, but you just kind of have to hope he's healthy. And I think if he's healthy, the offense is probably going to be good. If he's not, then it might not. And it's kind of, it does kind of feel as simple as that because of all of the things that they have on that offense. I think what's real interesting, and I think kind of part of why the Bengals were able to show that Patrick Mahomes can be beat was what they were doing on defense in those times. Like they were doing some really, fun things in the way and changing some looks. And that really confused Patrick Mahomes, and some of his worst games were against the Bengals there. And that was because what they were doing defensively. And the Bengals last year really tried to get young on defense, hopefully in a sense that they could get everyone on offense signed to these big contracts. So they tried to get younger and cheaper on defense last year, and hoping that Lou Anarumo, their defensive coordinator, could kind of make everything click there. And that didn't really work. They were one of the worst defenses in the league last year. So I'm very interested to see what that defense is going to be, because I think that is going to be what the ceiling of the team is, because if the offense is maybe either injured or just trying to get its groove back early in the year, if this defense is still one of the worst units, and they did bring in some veterans. They brought Von Bell back. They brought in Gino Stone at safety, and I think that's where a lot of their issues were on the back end. So if that defense can click again, then I think that gives the offense a little more margin for error as Burrow kind of gets back into game shape earlier in the year.
No, that's a great point, because I remember when the Bengals made the Super Bowl a few years ago, and to your point, Dan, there were some people that were talking about, hey, obviously Joe Burrow, but, what Lou's doing with this defense. I remember, Lou even getting some head coaching consideration, and obviously, like you said, you take a step back a little bit this next year, or this last year, so I'm kind of curious to see how they are this year. Just a couple more things with Dan Pizzuta here from the 33rd team. I'm curious, Dan, too, a little local flavor for us here in the Pacific Northwest. The Seahawks took down the Chargers this weekend. Obviously, didn't see Geno, who's going to be, Seattle's projecting starting quarterback, but just overall, first, quote, win of the Mike McDonald era. What are your expectations for the Seahawks this season? Can they surprise some teams with, some experience and a pretty decent secondary? Do you think it's going to be kind of more of a rebuilding first year with how good, just how good of an NFC they're in?
Yeah, I think that's the part of the tough thing, is how good, especially that division specifically, is. But again, like, they were kind of hanging around the division last year, so I wouldn't expect them to be much worse than they were last year. I don't think it's that significant of a rebuild. I think you have some really good pieces on offense. I love what they're going to be doing, just kind of schematically, philosophically on offense. I think we're going to see a much more explosive version of Jackson Smith and Jigba, the way he's going to get used in the Ryan Grubb offense compared to kind of what he was used as last year as he was kind of transitioning into the NFL. I think Geno Smith is a great quarterback, and I think they're going to be able to, with some better protection, because that was such an issue last year. They can be, slightly injured this year, and it'll still be a huge improvement on what they were dealing with last year. So I think on offense, they're going to be doing a lot of good stuff, and I trust what Mike McDaniel is going to be, or Mike McDonald, sorry. I know that's going to be happening
too many
all
Mikes
year.
and McDaniel, too many.
I know I really trust what Mike McDonald is going to be doing on defense, because just structurally, he teaches very well. You can just kind of see it when those guys are out there. I think the secondary is very good. I think they have some, exciting things along the defensive line. So I would expect them to be kind of, hanging around that wild card picture. And I wouldn't say that those expectations are too high. This should be a competitive team.
Yeah, and like you said, the division is going to be interesting because obviously, you have the Niners at the top, but, the Rams and Cardinals are interesting, right, as far as, where they stack up against the Seahawks and all those kind of things and injuries and all that. But, yeah, it's going to be definitely curious to see how the Seahawks look this year. Kind of last thing for you here, Dan, as we wrap up. Appreciate your time here on a Monday. We saw a lot of the rookie quarterbacks, obviously. This draft was huge in the sense of, like, so many quarterbacks went so high. And, if you had a pick that was, 14, 15, you weren't going to get one of the quarterbacks this round. I'm curious, after week one, who was kind of your biggest impress? And, it might be an unfair comparison now, but is there a quarterback in this class who you think could take a CJ Stroud-like leap this year?
Ooh, watching what Caleb Williams did, like, immediately, it was only, 8 dropbacks. I think he had 7 attempts. But just in the way he played, just kind of looked like he belonged. The way he was able to kind of move out of the pocket, some of the throws he did on the run, just kind of in strange body positions. That's kind of what you drafted Caleb Williams first overall for. And I think to see kind of him work in the structure of the offense too. I think you go back to what he was doing at USC last year. That offense was awful. It was a lot of Caleb Williams, like, please just save us, do something crazy, so we can, like, maybe get a big play here. I think he's going to be helped in the structure of the offense. I think we saw that a little bit just immediately in what he was able to do. Jaden Daniels, impressive, but 3 throws. I'm not going to go too crazy over that. One of the players that I did really end up liking was what JJ McCarthy did. And again, he's battling with Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold was a starter, but I think I like Kevin O'Connell's offense in Minnesota so much, and that just gives them so many easy answers. And I think you kind of saw that with some of the things they were able to do here. He throws that bad interception, but then comes right back. The next throw was a really well-designed crosser that got him open for about 20 yards, and then he has the long touchdown. So I think, him in that offense is going to be very interesting to watch. And I think because of that offense is going to be so quarterback friendly, it might give him, a leg up to be a little more comfortable earlier than, even the Vikings might have expected. So he is someone who I don't think is, the most talented guy that we saw in this draft class, but I think he kind of landed in the perfect spot to where I think there's going to be some good efficiency and some good play just because of that situation that he got put in. And I think we kind of saw the first little, glimpse of that during his first time in the preseason.
Absolutely, and for sure, McCarthy was one of those guys who right away, you look at those highlights and some good, some bad, but very very impressive with some of the throws he was able to make. And like you said, I think there could be a little arriving before necessarily they expected him to. So it's gonna be very exciting to watch. And Dan, I want to thank you for your time this morning. It was awesome to catch up and talk some NFL with you. We've obviously got a couple more weeks of preseason, then we'll get into the nitty gritty of it. Appreciate your time and look forward to catching up with you next time.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds good. Always a pleasure.
Dan Pizzuta from the 33rd team. Some awesome stuff from him as usual, but just so much to get into after week 1 of NFL preseason. And we're going to be obviously diving into it full here on Rip City Mornings, breaking everything down. Coming up next on the Big Show, we're going to catch up and hear from Trent Bray, some of his audio from Oregon State scrimmage over the weekend. You've got Rip City Mornings with Brenden Slaughter here on a Monday. Welcoming you back into Rip City Mornings here on a Monday. Brenden Slaughter sitting in for Justin Meyers today, who is out finishing up his Las Vegas vacation. Justin will be back tomorrow, but happy to be sitting in with you guys, joined by super producer Mike Shacker on the other side of the glass. Hope everyone's having a good morning so far. A big shout out to Dan Pizzuta. We just talked a whole bunch of NFL with Dan from the 33rd team and everything preseason, talked some quarterbacks. I really liked what he had to say about the Seahawks, obviously, is there's obviously not ridiculously high expectations when you've got, Geno Smith and Sam Howell at quarterback, but, Mike McDonald is a really good coach, and I think there's some talent there, as Dan said, so a lot to like with the Seahawks. We'll probably circle back to them a little bit later in the show, but as this is the on-campus segment, I definitely want to go ahead and dive into some of the action from this weekend, and particularly Oregon State football had their first scrimmage. Head coach Trent Bray spoke. We're going to listen to his audio here in just a minute, but just some takeaways that I had from Oregon State's scrimmage. Obviously, for those who don't know, Oregon State is in quite a bit of a transitional period as far as, moving on to Trent Bray, moving on with his staff. A lot of new pieces across the board, but still some returning and experienced pieces as well. So just starting off, offensively, it's still going to be very much a work in progress for Oregon State. I mean, you look at their quarterback situation from a year ago. You had DJU, Aiden Childs were your 1 and your 2. You had Ben Gulbranson coming there at number 3. Now you've lost those top 2 guys. Ben Gulbranson still there competing for the job along with Jabari Johnson. And Giovanni McCoy. And so far, that trio of quarterbacks, not one guy has really separated himself. And I think that's been something that Beaver fans, have had a little concern with early on. You kind of would have expected one guy to maybe start to take off and run with it a little bit. That really hasn't been the case so far. Still a real 3-man race. If you had to ask me right now, they'd probably go with, Ben Gulbranson or Giovanni McCoy. But that's, simply just off a couple weeks of fall camp. So I'm curious to see how the quarterback position ultimately flushes itself out. At wide receiver, really like what I've seen from Darius Clemens, the Michigan transfer. I've mentioned this a few times, but, he brings good size, almost 6'2", over 200 pounds. And I think what he will bring as a wide receiver 1 will be whoever is at quarterback, their best friend. He and Trent Walker are going to be the guys at wide receiver. I think there are, some more pieces, but those 2 guys, liked what I've seen. Running back, Jam Griffin, Anthony Hankerson are going to step in there to take over for Damian Martinez. So a lot to like from the Beavers so far that we've seen. Let's go ahead and listen in to head coach Trent Bray as he spoke about it, and we'll break it back down at the top of the hour when we circle back to it. But let's close out listening to head coach Trent Bray from Saturday's scrimmage.
In general, what were your takeaways on what you saw offensively?
Really encouraged by the run game. I thought there were a lot of really good runs, especially early with that group with Jam and Hank and that offensive line. Need to be more consistent in the pass game, but I was encouraged by the offense. I mean, this is probably the most competitive scrimmage we've had, so as far as back and forth, so it was good.
Any injuries to talk about from after this?
Not from today, nope.
So anybody out, though, that you're ready to, out for the season?
We'll see.
Okay.
There's one that we'll see that I won't talk about.
Okay. Do you still feel like this offense can be pretty explosive?
I do. I think weapons, and then it's like anything. It's just grind, refine, over and over and over again. Because that's where it is one step too late, one step too soon. We're just cleaning up that stuff because there's a lot of moving parts in what we're doing, which is good because it keeps the defenses off balance. But it's also offensively just keep doing it over and over again so the timing's perfect.
Is this still? You feel like there's still a 3-man battle for quarterback?
I do, and it's going to go right up till the end.
Did you see anything from any one of the 3 that caught your eye today?
I thought Jabari made some plays with his legs when things weren't open, which I really like, and then that last play, being able to keep it alive and find the open guy, that was impressive. So that was good to see.
It's still a good opening drive.
He did. Yeah, I think they're all getting better, and they're learning the system, feeling more comfortable, and really the end of this last week and today, I think they're getting better every day.
It might be still early to make this judgment, but do you imagine naming one starter, or is there a possibility that you could roll out 2 quarterbacks in one?
I couldn't even answer that right now, to be honest with you. We haven't talked about any kind of multiple quarterback stuff yet. We're just going to see who's going to win the job, be the guy, and then we'll see how we can use the other guys to help us.
Are you okay with the progress of the defense 2 weeks into camp, or do you feel like they're ahead or behind schedule at all?
I'm okay with it. You know, I wish it was a little further ahead. But then again, you look at, you know, all the new guys, because there's days where we look really good, and then there's days where we don't look as sound, and so just kind of minimizing what those days in between is what it is. But I think we got a chance to do good.
They did seem to make a few plays behind the line of scrimmage today. Is that, you feel like that's a kind of a staple of this defense?
It is. That's important. The way we play, the way we attack, those negative plays. Now you get them in the second long. Now we're going to create third long, which we're going to get off the field with this third long. So it's very important. So that was great to see.
How rotating guys on the front seven, almost like a hockey line shift. What kind of advantage does that bring?
Just fresh. It's fresh, especially the kind of our style of play and our mentality of how we want to attack and effort to the football. We're going to need to play more than 22 guys. Definitely up front, play more than just the 4.
Is that a specialization of what those individual groups do, or is it just fresh bodies on the field?
It's fresh bodies. I think that's been, you know, the last couple of years, something we've always done is been able to play, you know, 8 guys up front, if not more.
Will the second scrimmage kind of mirror this one, or is it more advanced stuff in the next scrimmage?
The next scrimmage, there'll be a lot of carryover. It'll be more of we're going to do more of a mock game where we're going to run through just like on game day. You know, they'll be in game jerseys and all that, but as far as the plays and what's gone, it'll be a lot of the same because we want to be great at what we do, but there'll be some new wrinkles that we'll put in throughout this next week.
How do you feel about points up on the scoreboard there? How did you guys sort of grade this?
Yeah, we got a scoring system for how defense can score points and how offense can. And so everything we do is a competition. We keep score. There's always a winner. There's always a loser. So every scrimmage, we're keeping score and competing.
What are your thoughts on tackling so far? What have you seen from the defense in that regard?
I thought it was pretty clean today for the really the first live work. We did a little on Tuesday, but for the first real extended live work, I thought there weren't a lot of missed tackles. So that's encouraging.
When it comes to making decisions about positions, what role does the scrimmage play as compared to like a regular practice? How much more heavily weighted what you see out here on a daily basis?
What you see that a scrimmage gives you is now, okay, can that back break that tackle? And can that tackler bring that guy down? When you're tagging off, okay, I'm there. Now you can get a sense of, you go back to practice and watch it, is that guy bringing that guy down or not? And so you get a new perspective based on what they show you as far as their tackling ability or ability to break tackles.
Is there a guy that was playing maybe on the third team that caught your eye today that you thought might need to look and see at him in the second or first team look? Or?
I think Jabari's one, and then I like those young backs and keep feeding those young backs and seeing what they can do. But I thought off the top of my head, just right after, those would probably be the 3.
I mean, on defense,
I'll have to be honest with you, I was watching the offense more today than the defense. So
wow,
I have to watch tape. Yeah, that's changed me a little bit.
It looked like, speaking of which, that number 19, Jaden Young, was around the ball a couple times today. Stood out a little bit.
Yeah, he's a real good player. I mean, he's started Pac-12 games when he was at Arizona, and he's done a good job for us as a teamer here, and he's played in game here. He's
7 a.m. on a Monday morning. Brenden Slaughter with you here for Rip City Mornings. Team USA men's basketball are gold medal winners in Paris, taking down France to win their 5th straight gold medal. Another impressive performance for Steph Curry in his first Olympics. And Team USA women's basketball also took home gold against France, albeit in a much closer game. The ladies taking it by just 1 point to win their 8th gold medal in a row. Impressive part from the ladies there. And the Seattle Seahawks opened the preseason with a 16-3 win over the Los Angeles Chargers. Coming up, we're going to have Spotrack's Keith Smith on to talk some NBA, and we'll catch up with KJO's TJ Mathewson to talk some Oregon State here on the big show. You've got Rip City Mornings. And welcoming you back into Rip City Mornings here on a Monday. Brenden Slaughter with you, filling in for Justin Meyers. He'll be back tomorrow. Excited to be with you guys. Shout out to We're back here on Rip City Mornings, breaking down the first hour of the show. We caught up with Dan Pizzuta to talk some NFL football, and Dan was great talking about a whole bunch of topics. Make sure to catch that interview on the iHeartRadio app, ripcityradio.com, wherever you find your podcasts. But yeah, there's a lot to talk about with Dan, and we got into a lot of great NFL stuff, and there were some things that stood out to me. Most notably was the Brandon Ayuk situation where. We've heard a lot in that situation, and he had mentioned that it's probably more likely that he's going to be brought back to San Francisco. And, I love Brandon Ayuk. He's one of those players that I really liked ever since, he made. I feel that he is he's a player who is very good, but is he worth, the 2 first-round picks that are being that San Francisco is asking for him? Probably not. Justin and I talked about that a little bit last week. My list of guys who would be worth 2 first-round picks as a skill position player in the NFL is pretty low. That's like Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and maybe a couple other guys. 2 first-round picks in the NFL is a lot. And, we joke a lot, but we've learned over the years what gems you can find at certain points in the draft. So we're going to get into talking some of the rookie quarterbacks just because we mentioned it with Dan, but there's a lot to dive into with the rookies. But just again, to kind of wrap up from the first hour, I want to go ahead and once again say how cool I thought the closing ceremonies were at the Olympics, to see how they kind of quote unquote handed the baton to LA for 2028 for the next Summer Olympics. The Tom Cruise, the musical artists that were there hyping it up too, and I thought the Mission Impossible theme was really, really cool too. And, more than anything, just, again, this is a massive marketing opportunity for so many athletes, so many brands. We're going to see branding like we've never seen before, and it's going to be crazy to see. Like, it's a Super Bowl is obviously big every year. The Olympics is quite huge too, and it doesn't come around as much, and obviously all those things. But I'm really excited to see what it's going to be in LA in 2028, flag football. Like, who can't be excited for some flag football in 2028? Like, say what you will, maybe it won't be fun, maybe it will, but like, that's something I'm super excited for. And as I mentioned too, bringing back baseball, bringing back softball, all things that are going to be really cool to watch in the 2028 Olympics. So for anyone that's listening that wants to go, I don't know if hotels do reservations 4 years out, but that's probably what you're going to start needing to looking at. Because I imagine getting down to Los Angeles any way, shape, or form in summer of 2028 is going to be a challenge, an adventure. And obviously the biggest thing is you've got MLB season going on right during the middle of that, right? So, we mentioned earlier that baseball and softball will be back in the Olympics next year. I'm very curious to see, ultimately how Rob Manfred and the MLB decides to handle that. Will they make the break a little bit later? Like, how will they work in that time when the best baseball players need to obviously be doing Olympic stuff? So that's going to be something to keep an eye on too. But just once again, could not be more impressed with how they did those closing ceremonies. Very cool stuff there in Paris. And now it's LA's turn. Time for America to take the baton. So very, very cool as it comes back to Los Angeles. But let's talk a little bit about the NFL and the rookie quarterbacks. We mentioned it a little bit with Dan. I asked him who could be the next quarterback to take that CJ Stroud type leap this season. And, we caught up on the big show with Frank Schwab last week, Justin Meyers and I, and he mentioned that, it might be unfair to ask a player or expect a player to have that jump. CJ Stroud probably had the best rookie season of any quarterback we've seen quite some time, right? So I think that's lofty expectations. But if you look back at this quarterback draft and how many guys went, I believe it was the first 12 picks, and, it set records. Everybody needed a quarterback. And if you were a team like, the New Orleans Saints or the Las Vegas Raiders who were picking, in the mid-teens, you found yourself without a quarterback when going into the draft. You would have thought you would have been able to find somebody like Bo Nix, somebody like Michael Penix. Nevertheless, everyone went really high. So I kind of want to talk about the guys that were most impressive here early on. I mean, as far as pure numbers, like Dan Pizzuta said, J.J. McCarthy, probably the most impressive. That does surprise me a little bit because coming into the year, I really thought, J.J. McCarthy, great college quarterback, but I thought he was a guy who kind of thrived with Jim Harbaugh's system, and there were a lot of great players around him. That being said, Kevin O'Connell up there in Minnesota obviously got the best out of Kirk Cousins. He comes from that McVay coaching tree. And you really saw they're putting J.J. McCarthy in really great positions to succeed. So I think there's going to be a lot to like there. He's obviously got, in my opinion, pound for pound, the best receiver in NFL football to throw to in Justin Jefferson. How all the rest of those pieces fit together still remains to be seen. But really like what I've seen from J.J. McCarthy and maybe shedding that label of kind of being a, quote, Jim Harbaugh college quarterback, so to speak. After him, got to throw in Caleb Williams. Obviously, as Dan mentioned, electric. Everything we saw him in college, being able to kind of dance out of plays. There was a throw that he made to Cole Kmet where he threw it back across his body and fit the ball in a window that was probably no bigger than a small window size. And it was an incredible throw where you just take a step back and realize Chicago hasn't had that player play quarterback. I mean, I don't know if I want to say ever because the Chicago Bears are a very long and illustrious franchise, but just the talent that he brings. And that's not a huge knock on Justin Fields. Obviously, he's still looking to win the quarterback job in Pittsburgh, and I really liked what he brought too. But pound for pound, Caleb Williams is one of the best quarterbacks I've ever seen with my own eyes. Seeing what he did against what I think was one of the best Oregon State defenses at Reser Stadium 2 seasons ago when he needed a fourth down, quote, bush push. Beaver fans know what I'm talking about, on fourth down to take down the Beavers at Reser Stadium. And the plays that he made that day when Oregon State really just locked down USC's offense, the only time they were really locked down in his Heisman Trophy winning season, pound for pound, I was like, this is one of the best quarterbacks I've seen. He could do it all. He has the escapability factor. He has the it factor. He has the swagger, I'm going to do whatever it takes to win. And I think that's going to be something that Chicago Bears really, really enjoy this season because, that rookie wall, it might not hit Caleb Williams. I mean, you look at who he has. I mean, their offensive skill positions are insane. I mean, you're talking about a really good core at running back. You've got DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and Rome Odunze out there out wide. Cole Kmet at tight end. Defense, we'll see, but there's going to be some players who can make some plays, and I'm very excited to see what the Chicago Bears can do this season. Definitely a team that if you play NFL fantasy, I'd keep an eye on because there could be some potential for a lot of offense there. The other guy I definitely want to give a shout-out to is Bo Nix. Obviously, the Denver Broncos first-round pick this last year, really, really impressed with what Bo was able to do, too. We'd kind of heard some chatter from Denver Broncos training camp that Bo, maybe hadn't passed Jarrett Stidham on the depth chart yet, wasn't quite sure where he was, and I think that was a little bit of gamesmanship from Sean Payton because if there's any player or any coach, who can put Bo Nix in the best position to succeed, it would be Sean Payton. You think back to what Drew Brees did and all that success they had. It was those, short passes, real quick over the middle, that slot guy, and then try to set up stuff. They also, got the ball to the running back in space. Sean Payton's offense is still one of the best, designs in the NFL. And I think we saw flashes, in year one where the Broncos, were able to do way better things than they were in the first and last year of the failed Nathaniel Hackett experiment. But, Bo Nix is a guy at Oregon, maybe wasn't asked to do a whole lot of spectacular things like, necessarily just, lining up, deep pass throws and all these things, he was just asked to, do what he did, which was short completions, some moderate completions for sure. But, Bo was a guy who everyone's like, let's see what his accuracy looks like as he gets to the NFL. And I think he's going to fit in really well with Sean Payton there. He's going to put him in a position to succeed with those quick throws, just like he was at Oregon, with, very much in that Drew Brees mix. I'm more questionable about the, who he has out wide. Denver kind of still needs, some receivers to kind of pop. I do like Javonte Williams in the backfield, but, if you're Denver and you've got your first round quarterback, I think you like what you see as Bo went for 125 yards and 1 TD yesterday. A couple other guys to mention here before we take a break and catch up with Keith Smith from Spotrac. Got a lot to talk about with Keith. We're going to talk some Team USA, talk some Blazers, and a little bit of everything there. But just to finish up on the quarterbacks, the other guys that played, we saw Michael Penix make his debut for the Atlanta Falcons. He is still one of the most fascinating players to me from this draft because he was drafted by a team that has zero intention of playing him in meaningful games this year. And, you might look back and go, well, Brenden, there's rookies all the time. Look at Patrick Mahomes, right? He came in and sat behind Alex Smith for a year. Fair point. The interesting thing is like Michael Penix, probably one of the better competitors I've ever seen. I just talked about how I think Caleb Williams is one of the better quarterbacks I've seen. Michael Penix is one of those guys where it's like it feels like it physically hurts him to lose. And I go back to those games against Oregon this last year when Washington beat Oregon twice when it mattered, obviously in the regular season, then in the Pac-12 title game. You think about how elite Michael Penix and Rome Odunze were in those two games, and I think he's got that it factor, and I think that's why you saw Atlanta take him despite signing Kirk Cousins to a big extension because, this league is about finding your stud at quarterback. If you do not have a stud at quarterback, you're probably not going to win the Super Bowl. We talked about the Seattle Seahawks with Dan Pizzuta last hour, and it's, the Seattle Seahawks, you mentioned, wild card, could have a big year, but is anyone talking Super Bowl expectation? Not necessarily, not only because Mike Macdonald is a first-year coach, we've seen first-year coaches have success, it's just that the Seattle doesn't have that elite option at quarterback. So I think you're either in the haves or the have-nots with quarterbacks. You're always looking for guys. And as far as, other rookies that were impressive, got to give a shout-out to Oregon State's Talise Fuaga. 14th overall pick. He was one of the first non-quarterbacks taken in this draft. He started at left tackle for the Saints over the weekend. Was excited to see him out there as he was one of Oregon State's highest first-round picks in many, many years. And to see him go that high is definitely great for Oregon State's future prospects. So we'll go ahead and take a quick break here on the big show. When we come back, we'll be catching up with Keith Smith. As I mentioned before, we're going to talk obviously the Team USA taking gold. We're going to see, is there a chance Kevin Durant could be back for Team USA in 4 years? Is Steph one and done? Is LeBron ready to, hang it up, or does he want to play again? And also got to get his thoughts on Jason Tatum. That whole situation, it took on a life of its own. I'm not sure if it was really necessary, but nevertheless, it was what it was. I want to get his thoughts on that. You've got Rip City Mornings here on a Monday. Welcoming you back into Rip City Mornings here on a Monday. Brenden Slaughter with you. Excited to be joined by our next guest here on Rip City Mornings. We're going to be welcoming in Keith Smith from SPO Track. Keith, what's going on, my man? How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Appreciate your time. Let's go ahead and start with some Team USA in the Olympics, Keith. Just on the surface, they took gold, but how was this run for Team USA this Olympics? Did they kind of meet expectations in your mindset? Was there anything surprising? Just overall, what were your thoughts on this group this year?
Yeah, I mean, this group met my expectations. I expected them to win the gold, but the days of them just showing up, rolling out the ball, and beating teams by 40 and 50 points, those are over. Those are long since over. That's not going to ever come back. Now it is competitive. Team USA has less time together than any of these other countries, not just leading up to the Olympics, but in general. We swap out the teams where these other countries, the base of these teams, at least, generally 6, 7, 8 core guys, they'll play together in every international competition. So they get more experience together, where Team USA, they need the lead up and then the group play to kind of just figure things out. And then you get into the medal rounds and the knockout portion of the tournament, and that's where these other teams are going to challenge. So it's always going to be challenging, but as long as they come home with the gold, that's all that really matters.
Absolutely. Catching up with Keith Smith, who's a writer for over at SPO Track. Appreciate your time, Keith. Let's talk a little bit about Steph Curry. Before this Olympics, it was I definitely knew that Steph hadn't competed in the Olympics, but just when you kind of took a step back and you're like, wow, Steph is in his late 30s and this is his first Olympics. Pretty good opening salvo for Steph, I'd say.
Yeah, I think so, right? I mean, just unbelievable. And it's so cool because we all got to kind of have the experience that Warriors fans have had so many times, at least all of us here in the States, of like, oh my gosh, he's going nuclear. There's nothing they can do. Hitting those 4 consecutive 3-pointers with the game and the balance was just that was like crazy. We were losing our minds watching it, yelling and jumping up and down and going absolutely crazy. So it was just a lot of fun. It's been really great to kind of enjoy the ride, rooting on some guys that when we get into the NBA portion of the year, you're not necessarily always cheering on. So that's one of the fun parts of the Olympics, and Steph was a big part of that.
And just to close, obviously, he had a couple big games, in the final couple games. Just how big was it for his legacy, as you mentioned? Like, we've all seen what Steph's done with the Warriors. But if you weren't a Warrior fan, you're just kind of like, tip of the cap kind of a thing. But now that, like you said, all on the same team, like especially like that shot that he hit, I believe it was to put him up 5 late in the game. But, just his shots itself, just how impressive was it to see Steph, not marred by Olympics? We saw some guys in the Olympics not shoot quite as well as they did normally, but it didn't really seem to bother Steph that much.
Yeah, I think it's big. I mean, Steph's already clearly a Hall of Famer, and that was never in question. But now he can go in and say, hey, I'm an Olympic gold medalist, and he wasn't just along for the ride. He was a big part of it. They don't win either of the semifinal or the final without him. He was that good in both of those games and came up, so clutch in both of those games. So, monster performance out of him. Great to see, that he gets to kind of, I don't want to say cap his career because I don't know how much longer he's going to go, and he's still got a lot of good basketball left in him. But definitely, a late career, major moment like this is really great. Like he said himself, this was the only thing he hadn't done. And that's pretty cool now.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure as far as Steph Curry's goals, like what's left to accomplish at this point. Keith, you've got the unanimous MVP to your name. You've got multiple titles, got the ring. But, in a bigger sense, like while, KD, Steph, LeBron, they have titles, how important was it for LeBron and KD for their legacy to get another gold, and just for Steph, like you said, to add that gold to his legacy? Like, what does that do for those guys, in terms of like how we'll look at them years down the line?
Yeah, I mean, for LeBron, right, he is absolutely assured. He's, depending on how you feel about Michael Jordan, he's either first or second on your list of greatest player of all time, barring, somebody coming out of left field with another choice. I think most people are there. So for him, this is just, now you're just lengthening out the page a little bit, right? It's we add another piece of parchment to the scroll and keep it going when they say all the things he did. For Kevin Durant, what's cool is now, he's going to look back. He's the most decorated team sports athlete ever, and he's going to come back in, with Team USA all-time leading scorer. And he said it himself, that's something that, records are made to be broken, and someone else will come along and knock that off at some point. But for now, I mean, he's just in a great spot too. So it's really cool, for all of those guys. And again, none of the three of them were just kind of along for the ride here. They were the three, driving forces behind Team USA winning the last couple of games, as well as several other games, but especially in the medal rounds. And that's really cool, at this point in their careers.
Catching up with Keith Smith from Spotrac here on Rip City Mornings. Keith, one of the teams that you definitely take a closer look at is the Boston Celtics, and you always seem to have a pretty good thumb on what's going on up there in Boston. I'm just kind of curious, I think it's been overblown quite a bit, but just what's your take on the Jason Tatum situation with Team USA? Is it something that in 4 years he's going to be on that team playing so well it'll be just like a bad joke, or was it really something there where like there was maybe question why he didn't play as much as he should have?
Yeah, I don't understand the not playing at all thing. And now, Tyrese Halliburton, where also it's come out that he was dealing with some kind of a leg injury. And I don't know if that was what kept him from playing or not. But with Jason Tatum, he's clearly healthy, clearly ready to contribute. And Steve Kerr just didn't trust him to be on the floor in certain matchups. And it kind of is what it is with that. And I don't know anybody, because what got fired back at those who were critical of it was, so you want him to play over Kevin Durant or LeBron James? And no one ever said that. The thought process was, hey, there's games where other guys have played poorly, and they're still getting their 20-plus minutes. And then there's games where Jason Tatum just wasn't a part of things. And then the Serbia game was getting extremely frustrating as they were getting really chewed up defensively, especially with their switching. And Serbia was able to find the mismatches repeatedly. And Jason Tatum's been one of the best switch defenders in the NBA for years now. So it's just a little weird that, Steve Kerr went away from him. But as far as 2028 goes, he said himself, nothing that happened this summer is going to impact him. He's going to see where he's at in 4 years and where his family's at. And I'll say this, I think the bigger impact is going to be, he's done it twice now. And a lot of guys are like, I don't need to keep doing this. I would like to have eventually a summer off and somewhere I can put my feet up and kind of relax a little bit. But yeah, it's definitely, it became a storyline. I know him well enough to know he would have preferred it wasn't any kind of storyline, but we'll see how it all, flows into the season and then beyond with Team USA.
Definitely. I think, like you said, Keith, perfectly summed up. I think it was just interesting because a lot of people are like, hey, here's Jason Tatum. He just signed the biggest extension like in NBA history. And, obviously that doesn't necessarily translate to like Olympic play, but I think there were a lot of people who were wondering why he maybe didn't get into the rotation as much. And that's definitely been a very curious question. Along those same lines, looking ahead to 2028, Keith, obviously a lot can happen. So much can happen in the next 3 to 4 years. KD, question mark, it sounds like, but is it safe to say that LeBron and Steph probably won't be back? Or do you think there's a chance all three of those guys could surprise and come back?
I mean, at this point, I'm not counting out anything. I said it multiple times this summer. If I'm LeBron, why would you ever retire? When you could still pull down a rebound and go coast to coast through everybody and score at ease, I don't know, and it's just that those guys have, proven that they're way beyond what we thought were kind of the limits on athletes. So especially basketball players. And I think that's really great, that these guys are still going. That said, 4 years from now, I don't expect LeBron. I don't expect Stephen Curry. I don't really even expect Kevin Durant. So we'll see. I think the rest of the group, sure, there's a chance. And then there's a bunch of guys who have either played for USA basketball in the past and weren't here with this team, or guys who are, they're kind of the up and coming, the next wave of guys will be knocking on the door. And, we're already hearing people say, well, what about Cooper Flagg and some other guys, that aren't even in the NBA yet? Now that's certainly possible as well. So I think we're in a really interesting spot with Team USA where, their best three players by most measures were LeBron James, Kevin Durant, and Stephen Curry when they needed them most. And those guys are probably not going to be there. So they're going to need other guys to step forward in a big way over the next 4 years.
Yeah, and the thing with LeBron James is just fascinating. I mean, Keith, at this point, he's, like you said, I completely 100% agree, but there's no comparison. So this is a lazy across sports comparison. But is he like Tom Brady, where we're just going to see him play elite into his mid 40s where it's like, yeah, when I decide to hang it up, I'll hang it up, but I could probably still play, kind of a thing.
Yeah, at this point, I wouldn't be surprised. I kind of wonder if he also, each year probably sits down at this point and see, all right, how am I feeling? Where am I at? And then, all right, I feel good. Let's go do it again. And there's been, is he a different player than he was? Sure. And you can see the parts of his game where especially at the NBA level, where things have kind of slipped a little bit. But for the most part, I mean, he's still playing at an absolute elite level. He's still an all-star, all-NBA level guy. Just it's now going to be for more like 50 to 60 games than it is 70 to 80 games. And that's if anything, that's probably what's changed the most. But, yeah, I every time I think, all right, yeah, we're probably getting close to the end, I look back and I'm like, well, I guess we're not. Like, why would he ever, stop doing this? And somebody said, hey, until he can't come out and average 25 points a game on decent efficiency, why should he stop doing it? And I think that's probably, it feels just about right. And even then, we may see him be like, hey, now I only average 18 to 20 points per game, but I've just kind of positioned myself. I'm a playmaker, and that's what I do, and those kind of things. I think he could almost reinvent himself to be around for another few years.
Catching up with Keith Smith from Spotrac. Appreciate your time, Keith. A few more things for you here on Monday morning. We mentioned a lot about 2028 and that team. Do you think Steve Kerr will still be the coach, or is that still too early to decide? Obviously, you had Greg Popovich 4 years ago. Now you moved over to Steve Kerr. Do you think that's pretty cut and dry, or does it kind of depend on where Steve Kerr is at the time?
Yeah, it'll definitely depend on where he's at, but all indication sounds like he agreed to do this for like one full cycle, and then he's probably going to move on. It seems like Eric Spoelstra is the one everybody wants who's next up. That's who I think it personally should be. I think he's committed to Team USA several summers. He's obviously one of, if not the absolute best coach in the NBA. So I think we're definitely in a spot where I would love to see him come forward and we really kind of figure things out. And I think in some ways he might even be the better one for the international level because he incorporates a lot of stuff with the Heat and the NBA that I think are very workable on the international level. And if we don't have the elite talent like LeBron and KD and Steph leading the way, we've seen Eric Spoelstra find a way to get more out of, his rosters are always greater than the sum of their parts. They always do more than what you think. So I think it's probably time for him to step forward and take things over.
Yeah, that would be extremely intriguing to me, Keith, because I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think pound for pound, Spoelstra, with what he's done, he'd be a hard choice to not say he's one of the best, if not the best coach in the NBA. And, us here in the Pacific Northwest have a soft spot for old Eric coming from just outside of Portland here and obviously playing for the Portland Pilots. But moving back over to just a couple things, news and notes that I wanted to hit up with you, Keith. Let's talk a little bit about the news the last couple days. What are your thoughts on Lauri Markkanen signing the max with Utah? A guy that had been kind of tossed around in some trade thoughts. There was the thought that maybe the Warriors would make a move for him, maybe the Thunder. Ultimately, he ends up re-upping on the max. Like, is this where Danny Ainge is kind of pushing the chips in and being like, okay, we're going to start competing now? Because looking on the surface, it still looks like they need more pieces beyond just what Markkanen brings.
Yeah, so I think, him getting the max, I think, if we go back, let's start with the trade stuff. They set a very high price on him and told teams, hey, unless you're coming with draft picks and young players that can play right now and help us, like, we're not interested. And that's tough, right? There's very few teams that could meet that and very few teams that could meet that and then be in position to have a team with Lauri Markkanen that was worth going for it. So I don't know how serious the Jazz ever were about really trading him. Now, when we get into them signing him, bringing his contract up to the max, this is easy for me to say because I don't have to write the checks, but it was kind of like free money because you have to spend money anyway. You use some of your remaining cap space to kind of get to where you needed to be to make a player happy. And what that allows you to do is, hey, we gave you a lot of money up front this year. So when he took over the 4 new years on the contract, he took $12 million less in total. it was a little easier to get him to do that because, hey, why not? So now we're in a position where you've got Lauri Markkanen in this really, interesting spot where if you're the Jazz, yes, you can't trade him this year. We all know that now, right? He's ineligible to be traded until, we get into next offseason. But for the Jazz, they have a lot of flexibility. If they're feeling like, hey, we feel like we can make another move or two and really push in, try to be a playoff team, they certainly have the ability to go do that. Or they can kind of play it out like they have the last couple of years, which is we'll play our vets, we'll see where we're at, and then sometime around the trade deadline, we'll make decisions on, is it time to sit some of these guys and maybe go in a different direction the rest of the year? I don't think they're going to be one of a real play-in challenger in the West as currently constructed. But I think what they did was we have a player who's just entering his prime years. We can lock him up, and we've got all this, cap flexibility, all these draft picks, everything else. We can really, build around him, and he'll be here when we get the right young guys around him. He'll still be here, or we'll move him in a future trade because now he's locked in under contract, and another team isn't like, well, we've got to deal with re-signing him. They just know they have him. So I think it was a good play all around by the Jazz.
Couple more things here for Keith Smith joining us live here on Rip City Mornings from Spotrac. Appreciate your time, Keith. It's something that, is a little bit old news now, but I feel like it didn't get enough publicity with Jalen Brunson taking I believe it was $100 million plus, might be more than that discount to sign his extension with the Knicks. It's almost unheard of in the NBA. I mean, you even go over to the NFL and, we've seen Patrick Mahomes restructure his salary to give the Chiefs more, but this seems like one of the biggest one of those moments in sports. $100 million is a ton of money, Keith, especially in the sense of salary caps and whatnot. Will we see other guys do this, or is this just Jalen Brunson being a bit of an outlier?
Yeah, so I think it was a perfect storm for the Knicks, right, for Jalen Brunson to do this. That's where he wants to be. He made that very clear when he signed with them originally and throughout the last couple of seasons, all the way leading up to this extension. That's where he wants to be. It's also New York. So Jalen Brunson, yes, he gave up $100 million in salary. That is 100% true. But he's going to make a ton of money in endorsements and other things because it's Jalen Brunson. It's New York. He's kind of, in a lot of ways, he's almost like kind of the prince of the city right now. They absolutely love him there. And then also he knows by doing this, I put us in a position where what I have done is I put us in a place where we are now able to keep players and add other players around me, and that's going to make us that much better of a team. So I think all around for Jalen Brunson, this is one of those things where it just really makes sense for him to, why not do this and put yourself in a position where, hey, I can now, move forward where I want to be. Yeah, I gave up some money, but it's not the end of the world because, I'm going to make that money back in other ways, and I get to play on what should be a really, really good team.
Right. No, totally. And I think more than anything else, obviously great stuff, Keith, but just, I think you also endear yourself to the fan base a little bit when you're just I'll take less. And like you said, you make it up, but the fans don't see you making that up. They just see that you cost less on a year by year basis. So I think that's one of the coolest things. Last thing for you, Keith, before we let you go, appreciate your time. Let's talk a little Portland Trailblazers. Let's put on your Keith Smith, crystal ball here. I'm curious, in your thought, what are the odds we see the Blazers make a move before training camp, whether that's, Jeremy Grant, who's been connected with the Lakers, DeAndre Ayton, Robert Williams, Anthony Simons, who's been connected to the Magic an awful lot. Just what are your thoughts that things happen before training camp? Obviously, the Blazers dipped the tax with the Malcolm Brogdon move, but I'm just curious with the new way that the roster's constructed, Donovan Clingan joining the mix. Do you think they're going to make a move, or do you think they'll go into training camp with it as is right now?
I always think it's more likely that there's no trade just because that's what the math tells me is it's just more likely that a team's not going to make a trade. It's just hard to make trades. It gets harder as you get closer to the season. That said, Portland made two pretty huge trades last year on the eve of training camp. So they're certainly no strangers to that. So then what we look at here is, for me, I would look to the front court. They've obviously Ayton, Williams, and Clingan, those are all guys that are going to want to play. Portland's obviously going to want to make sure Donovan Clingan gets minutes, and you can't really play two of those guys together. I mean, you can, but it's not going to go well. They're all centers. They're all guys that need to, have room to operate themselves at that position. So that's where I would look to for a trade, probably more likely Robert Williams than anybody else, just because the contract is a lot more movable. But, yeah, maybe somebody does come in and kind of blow them away with a trade for Jeremy Grant. Anthony Simons, that one I'm kind of two minds. I think he's still young enough to be a part of what they're building and growing there. And the backcourt's still really uncertain there because Scoot Henderson, shaky rookie season, had some injuries. Shaden Sharp didn't take the big leap we were all kind of hoping for. Also some injuries. And Simons himself had injuries. So I think you want to keep, him if you can. If there's a deal that makes sense, of course, you make it. But I think Portland's probably just going to go in with this roster. And I think Chauncey Billups, night to night, it sounds great to have all these guys who, this guy needs to play and this guy needs to play until you gotta play them all. Then that's where it gets a little tricky for the coach. But that's something he's going to have to work through in training camp and the like, and kind of figure that out, who his guys are going to be as the season starts up.
Awesome stuff, Keith. Really appreciate your time this morning, and thank you so much for talking some ball with us, man. We look forward to catching up with you again next time.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
Keith Smith from Spotrac joining us on Rip City Morning. Some good stuff there from Keith, including some Blazer stuff. I mean, it really will be interesting. They dipped the tax, so I wouldn't be surprised if Portland just rolls into this season, but definitely something to keep an eye on. So when we come back here on Rip City Mornings, we're going to hear from Deion Sanders. Yes, Deion back in the news again. A very exciting exchange with a reporter that we just had to play here. So you've got Rip City Mornings with Brenden Slaughter here on a Monday. Welcoming you back into Rip City Mornings here on a Monday. Brenden Slaughter with you, sitting in for Justin Meyers today. He'll be back tomorrow. Appreciate you guys joining with me. We just caught up with Keith Smith from Spotrac. Had a great conversation. Make sure to check that out at ripcityradio.com after the show. As Keith was solid, talking about a whole bunch of different things. You know, there was obviously some Team USA gold on both sides to talk about. Interestingly enough, said he wouldn't rule out LeBron, KD, and Steph considering an Olympic return in 2028. It will be in LA, in America. I mean, you got to figure someone like LeBron, as far as legacy goes, to be playing in LA. Maybe or maybe not. He'll still be a member of the Lakers. We would assume so. So that's going to be something to keep an eye on because, you know, this is the guy who wanted to stay in the NBA long enough to play with his kid. And I think legacy means an awful lot to LeBron. Speaking of legacy and someone who cares far too much about his legacy, Deion Sanders. You know, there's just not enough times that go by in the college football world without Deion and his Colorado Buffs just saying or doing something kind of funny, whether that's, you know, Deion telling his team they got to show up to a concert because that's where Shedeur is opening with his opening with his rap, or, you know, last year throwing offensive linemen under the bus, or, you know, saying that his coordinator wasn't letting Shedeur throw. Just so many things with Deion. So there was an interesting exchange that he had with a reporter, and we'll talk about it afterwards because I've got an interesting perspective on this because this is what I do. When I am not here talking to you guys on the radio, I am down at Oregon State interviewing Trent Bray, talking to other people, and I've, you know, talked with college coaches for a long time. So let's go ahead and listen to this exchange between Deion Sanders and a reporter, and we'll go ahead and break it down afterwards.
You've bolstered your offensive line here in this second season.
What does bolstered mean?
You beefed it up?
Because I mean, you know, I don't know all that bolstered stuff. I never used that in a sentence in my life.
All right, you beefed up your offensive line in the offseason.
Beefed up.
How do you sort of microwave
improved
that chemistry?
Improved. How about improved? Let's say that we've improved our offensive line.
Okay. How do you get that? Everybody talks about that's a, you know, the five have to work in unison, and the chemistry is such an important thing.
What is chemistry? You guys use it all the time. What is it? Yeah, you guys work together. You don't like each other, most of you.
You love each other.
No, you don't. You definitely don't love the guy back there. Y'all can't stand him. But you still work together. You get the job done. We generally have a love and a admiration for one another. We really do. Whether you throw the word chemistry out or not, everybody keep throwing that word out. Some of you don't even have chemistry at home, but you go there every day.
There is so much to dive into with that. I think the last bit, some of you all don't even have chemistry at home and go home every day. I guess that is true. That's not unheard of, Deion, and that's kind of a shot at all the married men that he's talking to. But, you know, if this exchange happened to me, and this was me and Oregon State head coach Trent Bray, for one, Trent Bray would never do this. I think this is a massive ego thing. I've heard many coaches use the term bolstered before as far as like improving a position. So I think this is like Deion did not like the angle that this reporter took with this question. I think it's a fair question because Colorado's offensive line was not good last year. And Deion on top of it was like, yeah, you know, we need to get new. Like he threw his offensive line under the bus about as bad as you could as a head coach. And you could see with, you know, how Shedeur Sanders was not being protected. Like it was a rough offensive line year for them. Now, that being said, you know, I have an interesting perspective on this, not only from my perspective as a reporter, but also that Oregon State went and got 3 players from Colorado in the offseason. They grabbed a pair of offensive linemen and a running back, and those offensive linemen are expected to start for Oregon State. That running back will be a near starter or get a lot of reps. And, you know, there hasn't been a whole lot that those guys have said about Colorado and Deion Sanders, except for, you know, the last couple of days when people started asking them, there was something that stuck out to me a little bit from Gerard Christian Lichtenham, Beavers left tackle. He mentioned that, you know, just the love. He didn't really feel the love there in Colorado anymore, and that the guys that he had come over with, obviously he was a senior, had one more year left, just transferred to Oregon State for his final year, but just kind of mentioned that, you know, didn't really feel all that welcome there anymore and all those things. And I think that's putting it nicely, but like put yourself in those shoes, folks, and just think about it. If you were at a university, say you're in the first year of a rebuild like Colorado, and you're an experienced guy, and you know that you're doing your best in a rebuild, and you can't have nothing but your head coach, calling you out and saying, well, he's not protecting my son, not protecting this. I just think it kind of fits with what we've seen with Colorado. And, I think Dion, they went 4-8 last year, and that's nothing to scoff at. But I think that, we think, there's this expectation that, Dion and Colorado are just going to be insanely elite overnight. And, anyone along the way is, collateral damage. And there have been several guys who have taken off and found new spots. And, I don't think this is, Dion being a bad guy, because I don't think he is. He just seems to treat his players in a very interesting way where it's you're either all in with exactly what I want you to do, or you are in the way. And when you're in the way, it's go, get away, leave. And, maybe that's more of his pro mindset. Obviously, he comes from, where, you're cutting guys. You go back to when he first came to Colorado, when he told half the guys, hey, I'm bringing Louis, and the rest of you guys should just kick rocks. So I just don't know if Dion can build a successful and winning team this way. It's one of those things where, now they're going to be in the Big 12. Offense will rule the day, so they will have some success in that regard. But I still don't know if that defense is going to be much better, and I would not be surprised if Colorado is, barely flirting around that bowl eligibility yet again. So, nevertheless, Dion being Dion, I think this continues to all be his act to make Colorado look better in the grand scheme of things. So, we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. We'll come back top of the hour. We got TJ Mathewson coming up here on Rip City Mornings, talk some Oregon State scrimmage. You've got Rip City Mornings on. 8 a.m. on a Monday morning. Brenden Slaughter with you here on Rip City Mornings. Team USA men's basketball are gold medal winners in Paris, taking down France to win their 5th straight gold medal. An impressive performance from Steph Curry, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, and company to take home the gold. And the Team USA women's basketball team also took home gold against France. Their game was a lot tighter, needed just a 1-point victory to bring home their 8th gold medal in a row. And over to the NFL, the Seattle Seahawks opened preseason with a 16-3 win over the Los Angeles Chargers. Coming up on the big show, we'll catch up with KJO's TJ Mathewson to talk a little Oregon State scrimmage as the Beavers had their first scrimmage over the weekend. Coming up, you've got Hour 3 of Rip City Mornings on a Monday. And welcoming you back into Rip City Mornings here on a Monday. Brenden Slaughter joined by Michael Shacker here, bringing you guys Rip City Mornings as Justin Meyers is out on vacation today. He'll be back tomorrow as I'll be moving back over to the producer chair. But great to be catching up with you guys today on a Monday. We've had an awesome show so far. First hour, we caught up with Dan Pizzuta, talked a lot of NFL and some big takeaways from Dan, obviously talking the Brenden Ayuk trade. We also talked what's going on with the Dallas Cowboys and why in the world Dallas has not paid CeeDee Lamb, Micah Parsons, Dak Prescott. It's just a very odd situation in Dallas. So to get Dan's thoughts on that, you can head on over to ripcityradio.com. We also talked a little bit about the Seahawks, their expectations. Dan thinks they could definitely be a wild card team this season in the first year of the Mike McDonald era. So that's something exciting to talk about as well. And we'll also hit on some Seahawks with TJ Mathewson here in the next 20 minutes, as he's not only a resident Oregon State expert, but also a resident Seattle expert as well. So excited to catch up with TJ here in a few minutes. But obviously, we're going to be circling back to the Trent Bray audio that we played from Hour 1, hearing from head coach Trent Bray after Oregon State's first scrimmage. So we'll get to that in a few minutes. But just a few things to touch on with Oregon State as they've completed their first scrimmage over the weekend. They've got scrimmage number 2 coming up this Saturday, and then ultimately gearing up for that August 31st game against Idaho State at Reser Stadium. It's going to be a very different Oregon State football season, and I think we all kind of knew that coming in, but just the closer we get to it, you see the differences in the schedule as we start to lay it out. You know, playing Oregon in September is still one of the most bizarre feelings that there is. Like, you know, Oregon weather in September is very curious, but I'm going to be pretty shocked if I go to that game and I'm wearing shorts and a t-shirt. Like, there is something wrong inherently with playing that game so early. So that's going to feel weird. And you all know, my thoughts on playing that game are not quite as positive as some others. You know, I think that game could have been done away with for a few years, but hey, you know, if you need a cash grab, you need a cash grab. And I think, in this particular instance, it's something where Oregon State gets a matchup against a top 5 team at home. And, that's going to do well for ticket sales and many other things. So I get both sides of it. But at the same token, this is, one of the better Oregon teams that I've ever seen built. And to see that Oregon State, has a pretty, ugly game potentially on the schedule week 3, that's something that they'll have to work through. But nevertheless, we'll have to see how that game plays itself out. But we talked a little bit in the first hour about how at quarterback, there's still not a lot of clarity from Oregon State. They've got the 3-man race with Idaho transfer Giovanni McCoy, incumbent returnee Ben Branson, and then Missouri transfer Jabari Johnson. Each guy brings something unique and interesting to the table. I think that, Giovanni McCoy is probably the most experienced option as far as being able to run the offense they want, coming over from playing at Idaho, but that's still FCS to FBS transition, and we've seen that be a little bit of struggle for him. Ben Gulbranson is obviously the guy right? And this is a guy who went 7-1 as a starter back in 2022. And, save me, the game manager and all that stuff. Obviously, sure, you can look at it all you want. And, maybe he did hand the ball off to Damian Martinez an awful lot. But I think wins are still wins. And I think if he could oversee, a successful winning offense when he was playing in that pro-style system under Brian Lindgren, I think he could do that even better in this new spread style under Ryan Gunderson that they're implementing. But again, his skill set, not quite the best for a spread look. Then we arrive at Jabari Johnson. This was a 4-star quarterback back in the class of 2022, just a spot or two in the rankings behind Aiden Childs. So Beaver fans knew what kind of special player they were getting last year in Aiden Childs, and obviously we saw that, and obviously saw him unfortunately follow a guy who shall not be mentioned on this program up to Michigan State. He's, just kind of there. But nevertheless, I'm just curious to see what he brings because he was a 4-star right up from the road in Tacoma, Washington. Went over to Missouri after putting up just stupid statistics up there in Washington. Anybody who paid attention to high school football up there in the Tacoma area when Jabari was quarterback, it was the passing, it was the rushing, it was everything. He was one of the top prospects up there. But we've seen early in fall camp, he's been a little raw, right? He hasn't played in a game. He's not the biggest quarterback out there, like, 5'11", 190 pounds or so. So there's, some thought of he's not the biggest guy and he needs to kind of get more experience. So, we'll hear from Trent Bray here momentarily as he kind of talks about how there really hasn't been much separation in that offensive room. Defensively, there's a lot to like, right? So I think if there's going to be a strength for Oregon State's football team this year, it will be the defense, because not only do you keep Trent Bray on staff as your head coach now, and he was the architect of this, improved Oregon State defense these last couple years, you went and hired a couple guys who I think were just tremendous hires. One of them being Keith Hayward, the defensive coordinator. Keith Hayward has had defensive coordinator experience in many different places. He's been at Oregon State. He's played at Oregon State, one of the all-time great defensive backs during that Fiesta Bowl run. So him as defensive coordinator is huge. And then on the defensive line, the Beavers went and added Eliza Tuiaki, formerly the BYU defensive coordinator, to be their defensive line coach. And I believe it was back in spring, Trent Bray was like, defensively, between me and these two other guys, we had 3 former defensive coordinators on staff. So I think he was really excited for what the defense can bring. There's some new things in the front 7 that we'll have to keep an eye on. Beavers are replacing their entire front 7 for the most part, but bring back a very experienced secondary. And I think the strength of this team is going to be in that back end. You've got guys like Jaden Robinson, Kobe Singleton, Skylar Thomas. I think very much like a couple years ago where it was pretty hard to throw on Oregon State, that will be the strength of that team. The front 7, there's some unproven guys, some guys that need to show what they can do. So that's a question mark for sure. But the strength of Oregon State's defense, no doubt, will be on that in the back end. So let's go ahead and hear from Oregon State head coach Trent Bray. We'll kind of set the stage before we catch up with TJ Mathewson from KJO Radio to talk about the scrimmage. Here's Oregon State head coach Trent Bray.
In general, what were your takeaways on what you saw offensively?
Really encouraged by the run game. I thought there were a lot of really good runs, especially early with that group with Jam and Hank and that offensive line. Need to be more consistent in the pass game, but I was encouraged by the offense. I mean, this is probably the most competitive scrimmage we've had, so as far as back and forth, so it was good.
Any injuries to talk about from after this?
Not from today, nope.
So anybody out, though, that you're ready to, out for the season?
We'll see. Okay. There's one that we'll see that I won't talk about.
Okay. Do you still feel like this offense can be pretty explosive?
I do. I think weapons, and then it's like anything. It's just grind, refine, over and over and over again, because that's where it is one step too late, one step too soon. We're just cleaning up that stuff because there's a lot of moving parts in what we're doing, which is good because it keeps the defenses off balance. But it's also offensively just keep doing it over and over again so the timing's perfect.
Is this still, you feel like there's still a 3-man battle for quarterback?
I do, and it's going to go right up till the end.
Did you see anything from any one of the 3 that caught your eye today?
I thought Jabari made some plays with his legs when things weren't open, which I really like, and then that last play, being able to keep it alive and find the open guy, that was impressive. So that was good to see.
It's still a good opening drive.
He did. Yep. Yeah, I think they're all getting better, and they're learning the system, feeling more comfortable, and really the end of this last week and today, I think they're getting better every day.
It might be still early to make this judgment, but do you imagine naming one starter, or is there a possibility that you could roll out two quarterbacks in one?
I couldn't even answer that right now, to be honest with you. We haven't talked about any kind of multiple quarterback stuff yet. We're just going to see who's going to win the job, be the guy, and then we'll see how we can use the other guys to help us.
Are you okay with the progress of the defense 2 weeks into camp, or do you feel like they're ahead or behind schedule at all?
I'm okay with it. I wish it was a little further ahead, but then again, you look at all the new guys, because there's days where we look really good, and then there's days where we don't look as sound, and so just kind of minimizing what those days in between is what it is. But I think we got a chance to be good.
It did seem to make a few plays behind the line of scrimmage today. Is that, you feel like that's a kind of a staple of this defense?
It is. That's important. The way we play, the way we attack, those negative plays. Now you get them in the second long. Now we're going to create third long, which we're going to get off the field at this third long. So it's very important. So that was great to see.
How rotating guys along the front seven, almost like a hockey line shift. What kind of advantage does that bring?
Just fresh. It's fresh, especially the kind of our style of play and our mentality of how we want to attack and effort to the football. We're going to need to play more than 22 guys, and definitely up front play more than just the 4.
Is that a specialization of what those individual groups do, or is it just fresh bodies on the field?
It's fresh bodies. I think that's been, the last couple of years, something we've always done is been able to play, 8 guys up front, if not more.
Will the second scrimmage kind of mirror this one, or is it more advanced stuff in the next scrimmage?
The next scrimmage, there'll be a lot of carryover. It'll be we're going to do more of a mock game, or we're going to run through just like on game day. They'll be in game jerseys and all that, but as far as the plays and what's going, it'll be a lot of the same because we want to be great at what we do, but there'll be some new wrinkles that we'll put in throughout this next week.
How do you feel some points up on the scoreboard there? How did you guys sort of grade this?
Yeah, we got a scoring system for how defense can score points and how offense can. And so everything we do is a competition. We keep score. There's always a winner. There's always a loser. So every scrimmage, we're keeping score and competing.
What are your thoughts on tackling so far? What have you seen from the defense in that regard?
I thought it was pretty clean today for the first live work. We did a little on Tuesday, but for the first real extended live work, I thought there weren't a lot of missed tackles. So that's encouraging.
When it comes to making decisions about positions, what role does the scrimmage play as compared to like a regular practice? How much more heavily weighted what you see out here on a daily basis?
What you see that a scrimmage gives you is now, okay, can that back break that tackle? And can that tackler bring that guy down? When you're tagging off, okay, I'm there. Now you can get a sense of, you go back to practice and watch it, is that guy bringing that guy down or not? And so you get a new perspective based on what they show you as far as their tackling ability or ability to break tackles.
Is there a guy that was playing maybe on the third team that caught your eye today that you thought might need to look and see at him in the second or first team look? Or?
I think Jabari's one, and then I like those young backs and keep feeding those young backs and seeing what they can do. But I thought off the top of my head, just right after, those would probably be the 3.
I mean, on defense,
I'll have to be honest with you, I was watching the offense more than the defense. So
wow,
I have to watch tape. Yeah, that's changed me a little bit.
It looked like, speaking of which, that number 19, Jaden Young, was around the ball a couple times today. Stood out a little bit.
Yeah, he's a real good player. I mean, he's started Pac-12 games when he was at Arizona, and he's done a good job for us as a teamer here, and he's played in game here. He's just a smart, reliable, consistent player.
What have you seen out of Guttridge this camp? Obviously, he had the first touchdown pass today.
Yeah, he's got a live arm, which I really like. He's a very smart kid. And then he's just learning. So there's times where, again, he looks good, and there's times where he's a little lost, but that's a freshman.
Will we see Cole Singleton at all in camp?
Kobe?
Or Kobe, I mean.
Yes. He's probably going to go next week.
Yeah. Okay. When Guttridge gets in the game, are there any adjustments you have to make to the offense because he's left-handed?
That's a question for Gundy. I couldn't answer. I would imagine there's some protection stuff, yeah.
That was Oregon State head coach Trent Bray following the scrimmage on Saturday. And definitely, as we get on this morning, definitely a couple things from Trent Bray that stood out. As we mentioned, Kalen Guttridge, the pride of Wilsonville, Oregon, getting in, had a standout moment with tight end Carson Kolb. So it was good to see a local kid get in and get some mix as well. So shout out to the Guttridge family this morning here on a Monday morning. We're going to go ahead and take a quick break now. We'll come back and talk with TJ Mathewson. TJ was there with me on Saturday for Oregon State scrimmage. We've got some takeaways. We're going to dive into the Beavers from head to toe. We'll take a look at the schedule and a couple other things as well. So keep it locked right here on Rip City Mornings on a Monday. Welcoming you back into Rip City Mornings here on a Monday. Brenden Slaughter with you here for Rip City Mornings, filling in for Justin Meyers. He will be back on the big show tomorrow, finishing up his Las Vegas vacation, seeing concerts, partying his face off. Kind of jealous myself. But one thing I'm not jealous of is that I actually get to catch up with one of my good friends here in the business, TJ Mathewson from KEGO Radio down in Corvallis, joining us now here on Rip City Mornings. TJ, what's up, my man? How you doing?
Good morning. How's the show been?
It's been good, man. Definitely fun experience. Glad to be talking with you. I know you weren't up at the 6 o'clock hour, but I got to share my most exciting story. So, TJ, not a lot happened between you and I when we saw each other Saturday until now, except for yesterday. My refrigerator broke in my house and had to go full refrigerator repairman. Taking all the shelves out, unscrewing everything, defrosting this heat or this cooling element that had probably 3 to 4 inches thick of ice. I'm sitting there, sitting in the fridge with a hairdryer, blowing off the ice off this thing for like an hour and a half yesterday. That's how my morning started yesterday. End up getting it working and it rolls now. But, my Sunday was quite interesting.
Can't say I had to deal with something that's strenuous on Sunday. But couldn't you just drive your food over to iHeart? I think you could do that.
I mean, yeah, right. Probably. Thankfully we live in a house where we got a fridge out in the garage, so it was like, okay, we can just move things. But for a good week, we were wondering why is our milk going bad after 1 or 2 days? Right? We're like, did we just buy bad milk? It's like, oh no, that fridge is pushing 50 degrees. So. Very, very glad that there was no, sickness or anything that happened from eating something that maybe wasn't at the right temperature. But I feel like I can take apart a Samsung fridge now, TJ, and fully repair it. So feeling pretty good about myself.
I think it would have been in poor taste if you showed up this morning and you had 5:30 in the morning and you had food poisoning. That wouldn't be good.
No,
you'd be struggling right now.
If I could think of all the ways that would make this morning even more stressful, having some stomach issues would certainly make it a little bit worse. But enough of my stories beside TJ. Let's talk a little ball. We got some Beavers to talk to. We'll also touch on some Seahawks with you. Appreciate you jumping on this morning. So let's go ahead and talk about the scrimmage that was. We played the Trent Bray audio. You were obviously there for the interviews, there for all the scrimmage. Let's just go ahead and start with Trent Bray and what he said. We kind of broke it down over at BeaversEdge.com. Shout out Beavers Edge. What were your kind of thoughts from what Trent Bray had to say when he kind of broke down the scrimmage itself?
Well, I think there were two main things based on what we saw. One, in what our eyes agree with what he said, is that there's really no clear leader in the quarterback room. I don't know if he was expecting one of these guys to be farther along at this point and sort of seize the quarterback role in Ben Gulbranson, Giovanni McCoy, and Jabari Johnson. But it's pretty evident now after one scrimmage that nobody is the leader in the clubhouse. They all have strengths. They all have flaws. And when they're in there playing, no matter who's with the first-team offense, there's been some struggles. So he sort of took that away. He said, well, we're still looking. We're still trying to find this. This is probably going to come down to the last week. Brenden, I wouldn't be shocked if this just takes until game week for them to decide who's the starting quarterback, or even if it takes them until game day when, they have to name a starting quarterback and someone's got to go out there for the first series. I think that looks more and more likely the more practices we see. I would be a little shocked if they name a starter before fall camp ends, because it has just been sort of underwhelming in waiting for somebody to string together some consistent play and look more comfortable and more in control than everyone else. The other one I thought was interesting was he didn't think the defense was very far along. And I think you and I thought that was a little head scratching when he said that, because the defenses look pretty good, and the defense is usually ahead of the offense here in fall camp. I think there's probably some technicalities, some run fits and some coverage patterns that he's not quite seeing that he's expected to see. And at this point, when last year it's so much more of a veteran group than this year. This year is so much more youth on that defense, and it's taking a little bit more time to digest some of these things. But I thought the defenses looked good. I just don't think they're as talented as they were last year. I don't think it has a problem to do with the scheme. The scheme hasn't changed all that much from last year to this year. I just think the players up front have changed, and it won't quite be the same group as last year. It might be better in some cases, but in overall a talent sense, probably not. So I think those would be the two things I would take away from what we heard from him.
Absolutely. Catching up with TJ Mathewson from KJO Radio here on Rip City Mornings. Yeah, I mean, diving into that, I mean, I talked a little bit about that kind of preview in this segment after Trent Bray's audio, TJ, just that, the front seven is completely new, right? So say, you've got guys who have played like Isaiah Chisholm, Melvin Jordan on the inside at linebacker, and, guys who have had experience on other places, Nico Taylor and Olu on the edges, and then your defensive line, same kind of thing, but relative to Oregon State, these are all first-time new starters. So that's definitely something you're working in. There's also been some injuries on that defensive line that, have taken some guys out of action, which has kind of been unfortunate. So, that's a position group that can't really afford to have some injuries. They've had a couple. But one thing that I mentioned that I think is working in Beaver fans' favor this year, TJ, is the offense. I'm with you. We'll kind of get into that in a minute. Still not a lot that we're feeling great about. But defensively, I think the talent they've got in the DB room, and then when you combine the fact that Trent Bray, still being a defensive coach, is overseeing it, you got Keith Hayward, a defensive coordinator, who had been a pretty good defensive coordinator his previous stops, and then your defensive line coach. The last time he coached was BYU's defensive coordinator. So you really have three guys whose specialty is running really good defense. And I think, that will be where Oregon State hangs their hat on this year.
You threw the comparison on Saturday to me that this defense would be more like the 2022 OSU defense than it would be last year's OSU defense. And if we're just, breaking it down in the most basic of things in 2022, it was a great secondary. It was a better tackling defense, but they didn't quite get to the quarterback as much. Last year, they got back to the quarterback as good as any team, almost as good as any team in college football, but they struggled tackling and they struggled covering at times. So, if just basing it off of strengths, you and I think the linebackers are pretty good there in the middle with Jordan and Chisholm, and then they have the secondary is really good as well. It's just sort of waiting to see something up front, something to pop up front. They don't really have anyone, and you can scheme this. We've seen them try and scheme it in fall camp with a number of pressures and packages and sort, but they don't have someone on that front, especially in the front four, who's going to consistently win one-on-ones right now. Last year, they had multiple guys who could do that. This year, they don't, and that's going to be up to that coaching staff right there to find a way to get some pressure on the quarterback. So they don't. Doesn't matter how good your secondary is, there will be guys open.
Absolutely. And then you kind of look at the schedule this year. We were talking about it. There are some pass-happy teams, right, in the Mountain West. And, while Oregon State does have a largely Mountain West schedule this year, there are going to be teams that definitely look to throw the ball. And like you said, if you can't get pressure on the quarterback, that quarterback can sit back there all day. That'll, certainly be something they don't want to see. But to your point, yeah, I do think that if there's one area that doesn't give me too much concern, is I think that Trent Bray has proven last couple of years he knows how to get a defense to play pretty good despite, different personnel and all those things. So I'm less worried about defense, but offense, TJ, let's go ahead and switch gears to the other side of the ball. I wouldn't say I'm not surprised that a quarterback hasn't taken over yet, but I think it's also being glossed over how uncomfortable transitions in offense can be the first year. When a team schematically changes over from one system to another, Oregon State's case, going from pro, going to spread, maybe they make it look easy. But I also feel like that's something where every guy on this roster was recruited to play in a different offense, except for some of the guys they brought in the transfer portal. Do you think there will be a bit of a feeling it out period offensively, TJ, where they're still just trying to figure out what works best? Because we haven't seen in practice them have a lot of explosive plays.
It almost certainly seems like it, and you hope it only lasts a week or two of that, because they still have some time left in fall camp, but they've had – they had all spring to install the offense. They were installing the offense in fall as well, making sure they have new guys, all the new guys they want in there. This might take a while. And you bring up a good point with the pro style versus spread. Now, I will say in college, you really have to be ready to play whatever because you never know, and coaching changes happen all the time. And even if these guys are recruited to play in a pro style offense, there are still really good skill players on this offense. Like the Beavers' top 2 receivers, Trent Walker and Darius Clemens, like those two guys are good. Like they're legitimately good. They each have different strengths and skill sets. I think that group is solid. Maybe not as good as they were last year because I thought, Anthony Gould and Silas Bolden are pretty explosive guys. I don't know if Clemens and Walker at this point, you can label them as explosive, but they certainly have strengths of a skill set, especially because of the size they bring to the table. Tight end room, it's kind of hard to replace Jack Velling. I think Jermaine Terry's got some good traits, but I think it's kind of hard to match up what Velling brought last year. Running back room is like the same. Like Damien's great. Like I'm sure Oregon State fans are all going to miss Damien Martinez, but this running back room is really good. Like it's certainly 4 deep is just solid. So there's almost no reason you feel like, Brenden, if everything is clicking, that this offense can't be good because the skill players who are going to touch the ball and score the touchdowns and make explosive plays are all really good. The problem is we just haven't seen any of it. They struggle to get any play beyond 10 yards. Like really, really struggle to do that. And it's disappointing because they're a little too talented to be doing that.
Right. And that's a good point because I was mentioning just before you came on that, we were listening back to Trent Bray's audio and, when he was talking about the Kalen Guttridge touchdown pass to Carson Kolb, at tight end. And that was, third or fourth string offense. And I think, we were kind of saying at the time, that was one of the more highlight plays of the day, along with, a scoop and score from the defense. But the offense really had to pretty much grind for everything. I think they got a late touchdown just as we were getting ready to do interviews. But another thing you mentioned as well, TJ, that I want to circle back to is you mentioned Jam Griffin and Anthony Hankerson. I think, Beaver fans obviously remember Jam Griffin really well. He was a player that I think endeared himself amongst the fans with his running style. Kind of, tell for everyone who hasn't seen a practice yet why Beaver fans will love the duo of Jam Griffin, Anthony Hankerson. It really is like a 1A, 1B thing, and I think they're going to be set up really well if they can get solid blocking in front of them.
Well, they're pretty similar runners, and they're pretty versatile as well. I mean, we're talking both pass catching and rushing. So the opportunities for them in this offense and just the sort of diversity of usage that they both can do is immense. I mean, I know to circle back to Damien Martinez again, he was and he was progressing as he did here at Oregon State through 2 years and was learning to block a little bit better and catch passes a little bit better. And we saw a little bit more of that last year before he left and went to Miami. But these two guys are different runners than Damien. They're smaller. They're a little bit quicker. It doesn't mean they're small running backs, but they are smaller than Damien Martinez, who's, gigantic. So it just adds a little bit more speed and a little bit more of a dynamic element to the Beavers running back room. And I don't know if they're going to have some sort of the same. I don't think they'll have the same successful. What's the right way to put this? They won't have the same strengths as Damien Martinez. Damien loved running outside. Outside zone was his bread and butter, and he would half the time take that into the end zone for a touchdown. I don't know if that's 100% going to be a strength for these two guys. I don't know if the Beavers are going to. I don't think the Beavers are going to live and die by just hammering these guys up the middle. I think these guys are also going to want to be out on the edge in space and creating opportunities for this offense, whether it be a handoff or something this offense seems to focus a little bit more on, which is getting short passes to running backs as sort of an extension of the run game. Make it easier on these quarterbacks if they're struggling to get the ball down the field than a check down to a running back who's explosive in space is a good counter to that.
We're joined by TJ Mathewson from KJO Radio here on Rip City Mornings. TJ, let's go ahead and make you the offensive coordinator of the Oregon State Beavers. So Ryan Gunderson has taken a temporary leave, and TJ will be overseeing the offense early on in fall camp. And yes, by the way, TJ, you do get to collect that salary for as long as you have the imaginary hat on.
Thanks for the promotion, people.
But no, all jokes aside, feet to the fire. you had to choose a starting quarterback right now, who are you going with and why?
What's my goal here? What are we winning 8 games? What's the goal?
Yeah, I mean, I think not just wanting to get the. I mean, just you pick a guy right now, for whatever reasons you come up with, but you just pick a guy.
I would want to watch Jabari Johnson more than the other two. He's got the best tools. He's small. I mean,
It's what, 5'10", 190, I think?
It's probably good. The Beavers are playing in the Mountain West. I don't think he'll be too overwhelmed physically. But I was saying to you, he looks like Bryce Young out there. Now, Bryce Young in college, remember, was pretty darn good. So it's not really an issue at this level. You can make it work. But he's very clearly not just like a physical specimen. But there are some things he does very well that the other two just can't physically replicate. He's got a rocket of a right arm. The accuracy is hit or miss. I thought it was a little bit better in the spring when we first saw him than it has been in the fall. But still, he's got arm talent that neither McCoy or Gulbranson can have. And he's also faster than both of them, too. When he's out there scrambling, when he's out on the edge, he's not going to run over anybody. They're probably going to ask him to slide whenever he goes out there and scrambles. But he's quick. So if he can get in the open field, he can outrun most guys when he's in space. I think it would be the most fun version of the Beaver offense if he was starting at quarterback. I unfortunately think he's the least likely of the three to get a week 1 start, just based on some of the reps we've seen. He was running with the backups on Saturday in the scrimmage. It seems unlikely, but I think the highest upside would be with him. But it would also be the most growing pains.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you, just in the sense of, like, we've talked about it before. Like, go back and, not everyone's able to translate from high school to college, but you go back and look at what Jabari put up statistic-wise up there in Tacoma, TJ. I mean, kind of near your neck of the woods, but, over 10,000 passing yards for his career, I believe pushing on 2,000 rushing yards. I mean, he was just everything for that school up there. And, like I mentioned earlier in the show, was just a spot behind Aiden Childs in those 2022 dual threat quarterback rankings. So the talent is there. I just think you're seeing the fact that he got buried on the depth chart at Missouri and didn't really play or get, involved in anything more than just like their scout team. So that, like, those growing pains would be to be expected. So that's going to be something I'm keeping an eye on, obviously, these next couple weeks. To wrap up the Beavs, TJ, real quick, give me a best case win-loss and a worst case win-loss for the Beavers as you currently see right now. What's like the worst case scenario and what's best case?
Best case is 8-4. Worst case is 5-7.
You think worst case they'd still be on the outside looking in for a bowl game?
Yeah.
Yeah, it just depends on how things break, because I would say I think worst case they're probably closer to 6 wins. I mean, I think the wheels would have to fall off for them to not win 6 wins against, playing teams like Nevada and, I'm trying to think of the other, not so great Mountain West teams on their schedule.
Nevada, Air Force, San Diego State.
Right. So, yeah. I mean, it'll be interesting, but nevertheless, they have some tough games. We talked about it. Oregon's going to be a tough game. Purdue's going to be a tough game. At Boise, 9 a.m. the day after Thanksgiving. That'll be a tough one as well. But nevertheless, yeah, I'm very curious. Like I said, a couple weeks of fall camp, we still don't really have a whole lot of indications as to what's going to happen at quarterback with the Beavers. So hopefully we'll get some clarity here in the next couple weeks. TJ, I promised you I'd let you mention some Seahawks. We talked a little Hawks this morning. We're going to close out with them. Obviously didn't see Geno play in the preseason game, but Sam Howell looked a lot better than what we had heard coming out of training camp. Kind of looked like the player who was very solid for me in fantasy football last season, despite not being a big winner. So I'm curious, was there anything that you saw in that Seahawks game that surprised you or gave you some optimism heading into the season?
Sam Howell did surprise me a little bit, and I think that's what they were hoping to see, because there was a couple options of quarterbacks you could have traded for this offseason. Howell was one of them, and Justin Fields was another one. And I've heard Justin Fields' name thrown out there, and people have been raving about him in Steelers camp. And we know the kind of athlete he is, and the tools, and where he was drafted, and all this kind of stuff. And I don't know if it puts pressure on Sam Howell, because as of right now, it looks like they're both going to be backups. but Sam had to sort of prove why the Seahawks traded a mid-round pick for him. And if eventually they decide to move off Geno Smith because he becomes too expensive, becomes too old, et cetera, and they're not in a position to draft a quarterback, Sam's the guy who's going to have to step in there and start. So they want to see something out of him. He's still so young. He's so raw. He started a ton of games last year. So you sort of want to see something out of him. And the term was thrown out there. I think McDonald said it after the game. It was just nice to see him play a little bit better than he did in some of those practices where he had struggled. It was clear he was struggling to pick up the offense and get in rhythm and catch up with the speed of what the Seahawks are currently doing. So I thought that was a positive. Like the defense, it's hard to measure preseason because it's instead of Justin Herbert, it's Easton Stick playing defense,
right?
Playing offense for the Chargers, but you literally could not have asked for anything better. I mean, schematically, it's just so night and day difference from what we saw at the end of Pete Carroll. And I'm excited to see with all the starters out there. I thought Byron Murphy had a couple of really splash plays. I think PFF didn't love his performance overall, but he did have a couple of highlights that showcased how valuable he's going to be to this defense. You know, Kobe Bryant made a really nice interception. I think Kayvon Wallace got his hand on that ball as well. And there's just a lot of really nice plays, a lot of things that I think reassured people that things are different now. And I think that's what some people have been wanting for a long time. And the fact we got to see that week one of the preseason is just refreshing. It's so nice to see.
He is TJ Mathewson from KEGO Radio talking some Oregon State and Seattle Seahawks. TJ, appreciate you big time, my man. We'll be talking this week, and I will see you down on Saturday for Oregon State's next scrimmage. Appreciate you, my man.
Sounds good, man. Enjoy the rest of the show.
Right, that is TJ Mathewson. Big shout out to him for joining and talking some Oregon State scrimmage. We'll go ahead and take a break here on the Big Show and close up with the RCM mailbag here on Rip City Mornings. All righty, welcoming you back into Rip City Mornings here for our final segment on a Monday morning. Big shout out to everyone who joined us on the show today. Caught up with Dan Pizzuta from the 33rd team in the first hour. Caught up with Keith Smith of Spotrac in the second, and just caught up with TJ Mathewson from KHO Radio. Great interviews, talking some NFL, some NBA and gold medal, and then obviously with TJ talking some Oregon State football. So lots of exciting stuff on the big show today. Big shout out to Michael Shacker for being super producer on the other side of the glass today. Let's go ahead and open up my favorite part of the show, the RCM mailbag. All right, Shacker, where are we starting? I may duck some tough questions.
Yeah, well,
I'm
we
not.
have mail for Justin, but am I allowed to open it?
Yeah, absolutely. Open it up, man.
Even though it's Justin's mail.
Yeah, open it up, man. He won't.
So Cliff Clavin delivered this mail, and I'm not breaking federal laws by opening it up right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
Well, let's open something up. All right, the first one here. Should Jordan Childs return her medal? And have you, Brenden, ever won anything and then had to give it back?
Ooh, that's a great question. I don't know if she should have to give it back. Man, that is a really, really
What did she do? Hide it like what Trump did with the documents? Put it behind her toilet?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think she should have to give it back. Now that being said, I can't say that I've ever had anything, Shacker, where it's been awarded to me and then taken away from me either. So I don't know quite what that feeling would be like.
You never taken anything that was free and then you found out it wasn't free and you had to give it back?
Not that I can think of. I mean, maybe as like a kid or something when you're in like the grocery store, and I've always heard the story like, oh yeah, the kid puts a candy bar and just slides on through the checkout stand. You're like, oh yeah, we got there. We don't know if we paid for that, but no, not particularly. Nothing I can think of majorly. But no, I think she can keep it.
I remember one time I scored some free tickets. It's what we do here in radio. We get a lot of free tickets to anything. I grabbed the tickets. And then the next day, a salesperson asked me to give the tickets back so they can give it to a client. Unfortunately, I already gave the tickets away. So you're really asking me to take the tickets back and then give them to you? Sorry. You snooze, you lose.
This is true, right? That moment has not happened to me. Thankfully, all the times that I've gotten some extra stuff from our awesome people here at iHeart, I've been like, yeah. Like I've gotten, like Kendrick Lamar tickets were certainly some of the highest. Khalid, saw Shawn Mendes back when he was super popular. So yeah, like you said, working in radio certainly has its perks for sure. What's next on the mailbag, Shagger?
Yeah. Well, I hope she doesn't give the medal back, but I think you have to, unfortunately. Let's get. So this is Justin's mail. Don't tell anyone that I opened his mail, but let me ask. Oh, we got one more right here. It is your first day on the job as an evil villain. What's the first piece of mischief you commit?
That's a great question. So first, we're going to start off by saying nothing that can detrimentally harm people. But like, if I'm an evil villain, Shacker, I'm going to like grab up like the resource that like everybody needs. So I'm going to be like, I'm taking over all the internet. Like, I'm just going to own like all the internet in like the Pacific Northwest. Be like, you want your internet? You got to come through Brenden.
You're going to make the world a better place. That's like that makes you a superhero.
Well, you never
Using
know.
your power for good.
I mean, but who knows, Shacker? I might charge an arm and a leg for it. But it's going to be one, like, I don't know. I'd grab something that people need. So it's like either that or I'd be like, all right, all the gas of every gas station. Now I got to get it from Brendan's evil villain lair. I mean, something like that where it's like not going to physically hurt people, villain. I don't want to be a mean villain, just like, a profitable villain.
Yeah, you're onto something with that internet, but it's also like what Elon Musk did with Twitter, and then everyone stops using it. So
Twitter, it's true.
You
Twitter,
take over the internet, maybe people stop using it.
It's true. Twitter has, it's lost its luster, man. I mean, yeah, so we can definitely close on this as we're about a minute left, but just the fact of like Twitter, every now and again, something happens where Twitter becomes old Twitter again. One of the most recent things that I can remember is like when remember when that Titanic submarine disappeared for a while, Shacker, like a year ago?
In the news last week. There was a big lawsuit. They knew they were going to die before they died.
Right. And it's like, that kind of a thing, like it reignited Twitter, or like when some of my favorite TV shows, like I'm really into House of Dragon, on Sunday afternoon or Sunday evenings. Like everybody on Twitter was talking about it. So definitely some exciting stuff. Big shout out to Michael Shacker for being super producer today. Big shout out to the whole Rip City Radio crew for moving me over to this side of the hosting chair today. And we'll be setting you guys up for a great day before Justin gets back tomorrow. Brenden Slaughter signing off on this morning of Rip City Mornings.